She won the state lottery, $15 million, and when she told her only son, he looked at her, crossed his arms, and said, "Mum, you're already too old to enjoy that money." And with that sentence, he killed something inside of her. But what he didn't know was that this mother still had the strength to change lives, including her own. That Friday dawned cloudy in Queens, New York. In the neighborhood of Astoria, the streets, wet from the nightly drizzle, gave off steam while the timid sun filtered between the rooftops. In the middle of the morning's routine silence, you could hear metal gates rising, the baker hawking his wares, and the slight shuffle of 83-year-old Doña Mary Gonzalez's feet, walking with her canvas tote bag and her hand-knitted sky-blue cardigan. Like every Friday for almost 40 years, Mary stopped by the bakery, greeted Mr. Joe at the fruit stand, and finished her walk in front of the kiosk on Main Street, where young Emmett, who was practically family, had set aside the same state lottery number for her. "Good morning, Doña Mary. Here's your usual number, the one from the day you met Mr. Robert, right?" "That's right, honey. That number never fails, even if it's never won anything," she replied with a faint smile. "Well, who knows?" "Huh?" Emmett winked at her. "You never know when life wants to pay what it owes you." She let out a small laugh, thanked him, and walked back home. But that afternoon, something extraordinary happened. At 4 o'clock, the shouting began. People from the neighborhood approached the kiosk. Emmett ran out, eyes wide, ticket in hand. "Doña Mary, your number came up. You won. You hit the jackpot. It's over $15 million. She thought it was a joke. She stood still, looking at Emmett, unmoving. What are you saying, Emmett?" "I swear it. Your number came out. You are the winner." The neighbors applauded. Some recorded with their cell phones. Others wanted to hug her. But Mary barely reacted. She sat down on the little stool in front of the kiosk and lowered her gaze. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh. She only thought of one thing. Her son, Dean. Years ago, he was a sweet, curious, kind boy. After Robert, Mary's husband, passed away suddenly, she dedicated herself completely to raising Dean alone. She worked as a seamstress, cook, and babysitter. She stayed up late, went hungry, and stopped buying clothes for herself just to pay for his books. But in recent years, Dean had become a hard, distant man, focused on money and his auto businesses in Detroit. He visited rarely, and when he did, it was out of obligation. Mary noticed, but she never reproached him. He was her son, her only son. That night, back at home, Mary made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and dialed his number. She didn't quite know what to say. She just wanted to share the news. "Hello?" "Hi, son. How are you?" "Mum, I'm in a meeting. Is it urgent?" "Yes, well, I won the lottery." "How much?" "The grand prize, $15 million. There was a long silence on the other end. And then, without emotion, without joy, without humanity, Dean answered. "Mum, with all due respect, but you're already too old to enjoy that money." Mary lowered her gaze. She swallowed. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. "We'll talk later, Dean." And she hung up. She was alone. The wall clock showed 9:15. The coffee had gone cold. The silence was so thick it hurt. It was in that moment, with her heart broken, that she made a decision no one would see coming. Before continuing, if this story has touched something inside you, I invite you to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss what comes next. And if you ever felt someone dismissed you because of your age or because they considered you useless, write the word dignity in the comments. Mary is not alone, and neither are you. That same night, her neighbor and confidant, Doña Laura, knocked on the door. Mary, I saw all the commotion on the street. Is it true what they're saying? Did you win the jackpot? Mary nodded, her eyes tired. And what did Dean say? Laura asked, sitting next to her. That I'm old to enjoy it. That I should pass the money to him. Laura frowned, indignant. Well, what nerve? That man has always been like this. Mary, I'm telling you as a friend, don't give him a single cent. That money is yours. And if you don't want it for yourself, there are so many who need it. Mary didn't answer. She only looked at Robert's portrait on the mantel. Sometimes I wonder if I failed somehow, she whispered. Laura took her hand. You didn't fail, Mary, but it's time for you to live for yourself, or at least for someone who truly values what you do. And so, with those words resonating in her chest, Mary Gonzalez went to sleep with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and her heart divided. What no one imagined was that, in the coming days, Mary would not only disappear without notice, she would also make donations that would change many lives and unearth a secret her son could never forget. The coffee on the table was still untouched. The steam had long since vanished, but Mary hadn't noticed. Sitting in the wooden chair, her hands clasped in her lap, she stared at the wall as if looking for an explanation that wouldn't come. The sentence echoed in her head again and again, like a Sunday church bell. You're already too old to enjoy it. Her own son, Dean, the one she carried in her arms with a fever at 3 o'clock in the morning, the one she cooked for with love until he was 17, the one she gave his first new pair of shoes to, sacrificing her own medicine. That same man, now fully grown, a used car entrepreneur in Detroit, with 2 teenage daughters and a wife she never liked, had reduced her entire existence to an age, to a nuisance, to a burden. Old, to enjoy what, Dean? She murmured, alone in the kitchen. The sun? Life? A child's laughter? She got up slowly. She walked to the dresser where she kept the portrait of Robert, her deceased husband. She caressed it with her fingers as if it were her last comfort. In that photo, taken in 1972 during a local county fair, he hugged her from behind, smiling while she held a red rose. Dean, then 6 years old, peeked between them, his face smeared with cotton candy. That was the family they once were, the one she thought would never break. She sighed deeply. She knew she wasn't going to sleep. Hours later, in the early morning, Mary turned on the dining room light and took out her hardback notebook. It wasn't a diary, but a notebook of lists, memories, and little phrases she had heard. She opened it to a blank page. She took her blue ink pen and wrote, "Sometimes, the saddest thing is not growing old. The saddest thing is realizing that for others, you no longer matter." She left the pen on the table and went to the kitchen. She poured another cup of coffee, this time extra strong. As she returned to the dining room, a shadow crossed her mind. What if I give him everything? What if I do what he asks, like an obedient, resigned mother? But something inside her resisted. Something that came from the depths of her soul. A dignity that had remained dormant for decades and was finally awakening. Dawn was breaking when the door knocked. It was Doña Laura, her lifelong neighbor, wrapped in her wool shawl and looking worried. "Mary, I heard about the lottery. Is it true?" Mary nodded, emotionless. "And Dean knows. I called him last night." "And?" Mary took a deep breath before answering. "He said I'm too old to enjoy it. that I should pass it to him, that he's going to invest it for the girls. Laura pressed her lips tightly. She paced the room before speaking. Look, Mary, I'm going to tell you straight, like I always have. That man doesn't deserve you. He has never respected you as a mother, and now he wants to steal the only joy life gave you fairly. I don't want to fight him, he's my son. And I'm not asking you to fight, but don't humiliate yourself either. That money is yours, and if you're not going to use it for yourself, at least give it to someone who truly needs it. Mary remained silent. Her gaze fell on the vase of dried calla lilies, withered for days. Do you want to leave money to someone who sees you as a burden? Or do you want to leave something worthwhile? The question hung in the air like heavy perfume. Mary didn't answer. She just lowered her gaze. That afternoon, after eating lunch alone, Mary sat down to mend a loose hem on her favourite blouse. As she passed the needle back and forth, her thoughts consumed her. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it symbolised. How Dean saw her, as an incapable old woman, as a figure from the past, as an old piece of furniture cluttering the living room. Suddenly the thread snapped and she pricked her finger. A thread of blood stained her blouse. It wasn't physical pain, it was the final drop that overflowed everything she had been holding back. She dropped the needle. She stood up. She went to the closet and pulled out a small grey suitcase she hadn't used in over 20 years. She opened her drawer and packed 2 changes of clothes, her bathrobe, a photograph, her notebook, and an envelope of documents. That night, she didn't eat dinner. When the clock struck 11 o'clock, she sat on the bed and took a deep breath. The decision was made, but it wouldn't be impulsive. She wasn't going to act out of pain, but out of conviction. The next day, she would do what many women her age dream of doing, but few dare to. Take charge of her destiny. And even though she didn't know exactly where she was going, she knew clearly what she was leaving behind. In the darkness of her room, as car lights passed on the street and projected shadows on the ceiling, Mary closed her eyes firmly, because at dawn, her life would change forever. The sky was beginning to lighten when Mary went out to the backyard. The pre-dawn air was cool, with that smell of damp earth that reminded her so much of her childhood in the Pennsylvania countryside. She sat on the stone bench that Robert had built with his own hands over 40 years ago. There, in that corner full of memories, Mary usually prayed at night. But that morning she didn't pray. She just thought. She thought about everything she had done for her son. She thought about all the times she stayed silent so as not to inconvenience him. About everything she sacrificed without asking for anything in return. And now, her existence had been reduced to an age, to a nuisance who had to give up her fortune because she could no longer enjoy it. The sound of a squeaking gate pulled her from her thoughts. It was Laura, her lifelong neighbour, struggling to push open the wooden door that separated their yards. She wore a scarf over her head and an expression that was both curious and worried. "You're up this early?" she asked, leaning on her cane. "Didn't you sleep at all?" Mary shook her head. "I wasn't sleepy." "Is it because of what Dean said?" Mary looked at her without needing to answer. Laura approached and sat down next to her, with the slow walk that arthritis had left her. Her movements were deliberate, but her tongue was as quick as ever. "I know you, Mary, and I know you're planning something. Your eyes are not those of a hurt woman. They are those of a determined woman." Mary sighed, lowered her gaze, and interlaced her fingers over her knees. "Laura, do you think I'm overreacting?" "Why do you ask that?" "Because he's my son. And sometimes I feel that if I get angry with him, I'm betraying my role as a mother." Laura leaned toward her, her face serious. "Listen to me closely. Being a mother doesn't mean enduring everything. It doesn't mean letting them walk all over you just because you brought them into the world. You gave your life for that man, and he didn't even take a moment to be happy for your joy. Mary felt a lump in her throat, but she didn't cry. Laura's voice, firm but warm, gave her strength. "And I'll tell you something else," the neighbor continued. "If you're going to do something with that money, let it be for yourself, or for someone who really deserves it, but not to feed the greed of a man who stopped seeing you as a mother years ago." Mary fell silent, looking at the garden. A hummingbird approached the dry flowers, looking for nectar where there was none left. Like her, perhaps, looking for affection where there was none left. "Laura, what would you do?" The woman smiled sideways. "I would leave a legacy, not a check." The words pierced her chest like a pin. A legacy? Mary had never thought of it that way. She had always lived for others, doing the right thing, fulfilling duties, obeying expectations. What if, for the first time in her life, she did something out of conviction? They went back inside and drank coffee. Meanwhile, Laura kept talking. "Do you remember the Children of Hope home? That shelter you helped years ago when you knitted blankets for the kids? Did you know they almost closed last year? They are out of funds, with no help. It's a miracle they are still operating." Mary looked at her attentively. "It's still operating?" "Yes, with the little they have. The director, Hannah, is still there. I found out from my niece, who works in social development. She says that place barely survives on community donations." Mary felt something beginning to take shape inside her. Something that didn't yet have a name, but was burning in her chest. She stood up from the chair slowly. "Do you have the address?" Laura nodded, surprised. "Sure. Are you thinking about—" Mary didn't answer. She went to her room, grabbed her purse, her wool cardigan, and the same notebook she had written in the night before. She returned with a firm step, with an expression Laura hadn't seen since Robert died. "I'm going," Mary said. "Today." Laura came closer and took her arm. "Are you sure?" More certain than ever. And without saying another word, she walked out the door. She left the house unlocked, as if she knew she would return changed, or perhaps not return at all. She took a taxi outside the market and gave the address. As the car drove through the streets of Queens, Mary remembered the small hands of the children she had once knitted scarves for, their laughter, their stories, the little they had, and how much they appreciated it. She felt her heart open up like those flowers that only bloom with the first light of day. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel fear. She felt purpose. The taxi stopped in front of a rusty gate with a sign in barely visible letters that read, "Children of Hope Home." Mary took a deep breath, paid the fare, and got out. She rang the bell. On the other side, a girl with a dirty face and torn shoes opened the door. "Are you looking for someone, ma'am?" "The director. Her name is Hannah, right?" "Yes. Wait here. I'll get her." Mary stood on the threshold, looking at the yard with old swings and peeling walls. And in that instant, she knew clearly what she had to do. The girl returned with a woman with pulled-back white hair, a kind face, and tired eyes. Hannah. When she saw Mary, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mary! Hi, Hannah. I need to talk to you. It's important." Hannah nodded, stepping aside to let her in. And it was then that Mary crossed that gate, unaware that she was also crossing the threshold into a new life, and into the beginning of a chain of events that, unintentionally, would uncover truths that had been dormant for decades. Hannah led her down a narrow hallway, flanked by peeling walls and children's drawings taped up with old adhesive. The echo of their footsteps resonated between the half-open doors, behind which soft laughter, children's voices, and some sneezes that revealed the damp air and lack of heating could be heard. "Forgive the mess," Hannah said as they walked. "Sometimes we have more children than we can care for, and fewer hands than we need." Mary walked in silence. She didn't respond. She observed every corner with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. That place, once full of hope and energy, now seemed fragile, exhausted, as if it were surviving despite being forgotten. Arriving at the small office at the end of the hallway, Hannah offered her a seat in a wooden chair that creaked as soon as Mary sat down. "I can't believe you're here after so many years," the director said, sitting across from her. "The last time I saw you was when you brought the knitted blankets right before Christmas. How have you been?" "Alive," Mary replied, looking down. "And Dean, does he have a family yet?" Mary took a moment to answer. She took a deep breath and then looked up. "He has 2 daughters, a wife, a business." Hannah smiled, but seeing Mary's serious face, she held back. "What brings you here, then?" "Hannah, I want to make a donation." The director looked at her in surprise. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she needed to make sure she had heard correctly. "A donation? Yes. I want to give you all the money I won in the lottery, $15 million. Hannah blinked several times. She looked at Mary, searching for any sign of a joke, exaggeration, or lie. She found none. "All of it? All of it. And your family?" "They don't need what they don't know how to care for." Hannah leaned back in her chair. She remained silent for a moment. Then, in a low voice, she asked, "Why here?" "Because you really need it. And because, when I came years ago, I saw a gratitude in the eyes of those children that I have never seen in anyone else's eyes since." Hannah stood up. She walked to the small window that overlooked the inner courtyard. There, 3 children were running after a deflated soccer ball. "Are you sure, Mary? We're talking about a very large sum. It's not a simple donation of clothes or toys." "I'm sure, but I want to do it under certain conditions." Hannah turned back, intrigued. "I want the money to be distributed so that this place never depends on handouts again, that the rooms are repaired, that the caregivers are paid, that decent food and clean clothes are bought. And I want scholarships to be opened for those who manage to finish high school." "That can be done," Hannah replied, moved. "But what about you? Where will you live?" Mary lowered her eyes. "I don't have plans. Maybe I'll go stay with a friend in the countryside, or maybe I won't go anywhere." Hannah approached, took her hand gently. "You could stay here, if you want. It wouldn't be a favor. It would be a blessing for us. There are many things to do, many children to care for. And you always had a mother's soul for everyone." Mary didn't reply immediately. She just looked at her, her eyes moistened, but firm. "I want to do it, not out of charity, not out of compassion, but because I want to close my life by doing something right, something that leaves a mark." Hannah nodded slowly. "Then I will help you with everything, with the paperwork, with the documents, with whatever you need. And if you decide to stay, this place can also be your home." Mary stood up slowly, as if it cost her effort to emerge from the pit where she had kept her own desires for so many years. "I only ask that no one know who made the donation, that neither my son, nor my granddaughters, nor anyone else relates me to this." "Why?" "Because I want to disappear from their lives as they did from mine, but without resentment. I just want them to live with the doubt, and for them to wonder someday why I did it. Hannah didn't argue. She understood that kind of pain, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that doesn't cause a scene, the kind that is buried in the chest like a nail and becomes part of the body. They walked through the shelter together. Mary observed the dormitories full of old beds and patched blankets. She saw a teenager cradling his little brother. She saw a girl crying because she couldn't find her only pair of shoes. She saw a tired caregiver with dark circles under his eyes, trying to keep order among the little ones. And on that tour, without anyone asking her, Mary had already made the decision to stay. At the end of the hallway, a boy approached and offered her a paper flower. "It's for you, Grandma. We don't have a garden, but I made it." Mary hugged him tightly. The boy didn't resist. He closed his eyes as if he had finally found a refuge. That night, back at her house, Mary sat at the kitchen table. She wrote a new entry in her notebook. To donate is not to give away. It is to return to the world a little of what it gave you, even if it gave it to you late. The next morning, she began to pack, and without knowing it, as she closed the door of her house for the last time, a shadow watched her from across the street. An immobile figure with a bag in hand and eyes fixed on her. The house smelled of dampness, of stored clothes, of suspended time. Mary walked through it for the last time with slow steps, unhurried, as if wanting to say goodbye to every corner. She touched the door frame where Dean's heights were still marked in pencil when he was a child. She caressed the edge, as if touching a healed but still sensitive wound. Then she went into her bedroom. She took the grey suitcase from the closet, the same one she used when she last travelled to Pennsylvania more than 20 years ago. She folded 2 blouses, a skirt, her favourite cardigan, a scarf she had knitted herself, and a pair of comfortable shoes. In a separate small bag, she put her rosary, her notebook, a photo of her wedding, and another where she was with Dean on his first day of school. She looked at them with tenderness, but not nostalgia. That past, although it hurt her, no longer belonged to her. She placed a blank sheet of paper on the bed. She took a deep breath and wrote in a firm hand, without hesitation. "Dean, you asked me to think about the most logical thing, and I did. I thought. But not as an accountant or as an investor. I thought as a woman, as a mother, as a human being. Maybe you're right. I'm no longer old enough to enjoy, but I still have a heart to share. Don't look for me. Don't call me. I am where I feel useful. Mum." She folded the letter and placed it on top of the winning lottery ticket papers, next to a copy of the legal document Hannah had prepared, which stated the total donation amount in the name of the shelter. Mary had demanded a special clause: absolute anonymity. She would not appear as a benefactor, not in papers, not in reports, not on any plaque. Then she went to the kitchen. She washed her cup, dried the dishes, swept the floor, and took out the trash. Not out of habit, but out of respect. She didn't like leaving a mess. And although no one else would enter there, she knew that this house, for decades, was her temple of silence. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and before closing the main door, took one last look inside. It was her goodbye. Without tears, without drama, just a dignified closure. She walked out with the suitcase in hand and walked to the corner. The sun was beginning to rise, gilding the tin roofs and cracked facades of Astoria. A couple of ladies were sweeping their sidewalks. A boy rode by on a bicycle, and Mr. Joe was already opening his grocery store. None of them imagined that this woman who walked slowly, with a slightly hunched back and a serene face, had just broken with everything she had been up until that day. She took a taxi. During the journey, she didn't look out the window. She closed her eyes. She wasn't sleeping, but she wasn't thinking either. She just let the silence embrace her. It was a different silence from the one she felt in her house. This one didn't hurt. This one wrapped her in peace. Upon arriving at the shelter, Hannah greeted her with open arms. She didn't say anything. She showed her a small room at the end of the hallway. It was old, with a single bed, an antique dresser, a lampshadeless lamp, and a shelf with used books. Mary entered, put down her suitcase, and sat on the edge of the bed. There was no luxury, but there was a strange comfort. That room smelled of life. For the rest of the day, Hannah and a notary friend signed the necessary documents. The transfer would be registered as an anonymous private donation with no reversal conditions. Mary listened to everything attentively, but without nerves. She was determined. Each signature, each initial, was a step further away from a life that was no longer hers, and a step closer to something she didn't fully understand yet, but which gave her meaning. That night, after eating rice and beans with the children, Mary returned to her room. She sat down to write in her notebook. Today I am no longer the mother of one. Today I am the grandmother of everyone. She smiled. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. What she didn't know was that, while she slept, in the living room of her old house, a masculine silhouette was opening the door with a copy of the key, and upon seeing the missing suitcase and the documents on the table, let out a curse that echoed through the empty walls. Dean pushed the door harder than necessary. He had spent the entire drive from Detroit to Queens, frowning, repressing the bad mood that had been burning in his throat since his mother hadn't responded to messages or calls. At first, he thought she was sick, maybe confused, but something inside him, and discomfort he couldn't name, told him there was more behind that silence. He entered the house like someone coming to claim a debt, not with worry, but with a sense of entitlement. He didn't greet. He didn't call for his mother. He just moved forward. The house was strangely tidy, too tidy. Everything in its place, the dishes washed, the floor clean, the curtains closed, the coffee maker empty and dry. There was no smell of food, or dirty laundry, or perfume. The silence was dense, a silence that was not rest, but goodbye. He went straight to the kitchen. On the table, he found a folded envelope. Next to it, several documents. The lottery ticket, a copy of the donation deed, and the letter. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was unmistakable. He picked it up slowly. He knew that if he read it, something inside him would break. And yet, he didn't hesitate. Dean, you asked me to think about the most logical thing, and I did. He read each line with a tight jaw, his fingers tense. When he finished, he slammed the paper down on the table with a dry thud. "What the heck did you do, Mom?" he exploded, his voice trembling with contained rage. He began pacing back and forth, checking the drawers, looking for signs, traces, clues. He opened the closet, empty. The grey suitcase was gone. The bathroom mirror had traces of moisture, but no toothbrush. His reading glasses were missing from the dresser. In the living room, Robert's photo had disappeared from the frame. It was as if his mother had erased her trace on purpose, and that, precisely, was what hurt him the most. He returned to the kitchen. He reread the documents more calmly. The paper that confused him the most was the transfer, $15 million legally donated to the Children of Hope Home, with an express waiver of any compensation or reversal. Everything was in order. Signed. Notarized. His hands were trembling, not from sadness, from helplessness. He grabbed his cell phone. He called a friend of his who worked in a notary's office. "Hey, I need you to look at some papers." Something doesn't add up. What happened? My mother made a huge donation without telling me anything. It can't be legal. How much did she donate? 15 million. Silence on the other end. Dean, if she signed it in full possession of her faculties and before a notary, there's not much to do. But she's an elderly woman. She's been manipulated, I'm sure. That can't be valid. Look, send me a copy. But if everything is legal, there's no going back. He hung up. He took a deep breath. He hit the table with a dry punch. At that moment, a video call from his wife, Laurie, came in. He didn't answer. Then a voice message. Dean, how is your mum? Did you resolve the money situation? He turned off the screen. He walked to the patio. The sun was beginning to warm up, but he felt a strange chill on the back of his neck. He had never felt so out of control. His mother hadn't just left. She had defied him. She had ignored him. She had decided for herself. And that, for a man like him, used to having the last word, was an offense he couldn't easily forgive. He returned to the living room. He looked at the letter one last time. He reread it, this time slower, more human. Don't look for me. Don't call me. I am where I feel useful. He felt an emptiness in his stomach, a fear he hadn't felt even when a heart problem was detected a couple of years ago. His mother had left, yes, but she had left with dignity, with strength, and that disarmed him more than any reproach. He slumped into the chair, rested his elbows on the table, and for the first time in a long time, he remained silent. What he didn't know was that at that very moment, miles away, one of his daughters was also reading the letter her grandmother had secretly left for her. A handwritten letter on old paper that said, Anne, don't let your father tell you what you're worth. Life takes care of showing everyone the price of their actions. Dean did not immediately return to Detroit. He stayed in Queens, locked in the empty house, pacing back and forth, as if each room could offer him a different answer, as if the walls owed him an explanation. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He didn't talk to anyone. He had the phone in his hand, but he didn't dare call his daughters, or his wife, or anyone. He knew that any conversation he had at that moment would only fill him with more questions he didn't want to answer. And deep down, what tormented him the most was an idea that grew like a shadow inside his head. What if his mother was right? But no, he couldn't accept it. The next day, very early, he arrived at the notary's office where his friend Steve worked, a man around 60 years old, with whom he had closed several real estate deals in the past. Thanks for seeing me without an appointment, Dean said, entering without greeting the staff. Did something serious happen? Steve asked, noticing the tense expression on his face. I need to annul a donation. My mother, Mary Gonzalez, transferred $15 million to an institution, but she wasn't in her right mind. They manipulated her. She was deceived. Steve frowned. He signaled for him to follow him to his office. They closed the door. Do you have a copy of the documents? Dean pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the desk. Steve reviewed them in silence. He read each page carefully and then let out a long sigh. Dean, this is in order. Signed before a notary, with witnesses, validated by a doctor who certified that she was in full possession of her faculties. That doesn't prove anything, Dean exploded, hitting the table. She was over 80 years old. How can an elderly person make such an absurd decision? Steve looked at him fixedly without blinking. Absurd for whom? For you? Dean didn't answer. Look, Steve continued, in a more serious tone. You and I have made many deals. I know how you are. Always calculating, always anticipating. But this time you didn't see it coming, and it hurts you because you didn't control her. Dean clenched his fists. He was about to explode again, but something in his friend's gaze made him back down. Is there anything legal that can be done? He finally asked, lowering his tone. You could try to sue for incapacity, allege manipulation, emotional pressure, but it's a long, expensive road, and I warn you, you will lose. Because this signature has force, it has legal structure, and if she declares that it was her decision, not even a judge can change it. So you also think she did it intentionally? Dean, the question is not why she did it. The question is why she had to do it without telling you anything. That last sentence was like a slap in the face. Dean left the notary's office without saying goodbye. He drove aimlessly, wandering through the streets of Queens, until he found himself in front of the church where he was baptized. He parked the car, got out, and sat on the stone bench in front of the square. He watched a grandmother quietly combing her granddaughter's hair. The girl was eating a donut. They didn't say a word, but the tenderness between them was evident. Dean swallowed. He stood up. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Hello? His wife's voice answered. Laurie, tell the girls I won't be home this week. I have to sort some things out. And your mother? My mother did something I can't understand, but I'm going to find her. And when I do, she's going to have to give me an explanation. What if she doesn't want to? Dean was silent. Well then, he said, someone else is going to pay for what she did. He hung up. He returned to the car, turned on the engine, and took a small contact notebook out of the glove compartment. Old, disorganized, but still useful. He began dialing one by one, old friends of Mary's, neighbors, former members of the church group, even the number of the drugstore where she bought her medicine. No one knew anything, until an elderly voice on the other end of the line said something that made him stop dead. I saw her a few days ago. She took a taxi at the corner of the market. She was carrying a suitcase, and she looked calm, very calm. Where did she go? I don't know, but when I greeted her, she just smiled at me. She stroked my hand and said, Now I'm finally going to do what I should have done years ago. Dean pressed the phone against his ear. Do you remember the taxi? A white one, with green stickers. It was from the stand. If you want, I can ask the driver. Do it. I'll pay you whatever it takes. I don't need your money, young man. I just hope it's not too late for what you're looking for. And she hung up. Dean slowly lowered the phone. He looked at the horizon. The sun was beginning to set, staining the rooftops orange. His mother was out of his reach. But not for long. What he still ignored was that his eldest daughter, Anne, was already beginning to read the papers he left on the table. And in them, she was going to find something that would completely change the perception she had of her father. Something that would open a deep crack in her family, and that could no longer be hidden. Anne was reading the document on the table for the third time. She was not an impulsive or naive teenager. At 23, a law student at Columbia University in New York, she had a clear, disciplined mind and a character she had inherited directly from her grandmother. Beside her, her 18-year-old sister Carrie moved quietly in the kitchen. She was boiling water for tea, but was clearly restless. She didn't speak, but kept glancing at the papers, trying to read something from afar without daring to approach. Is this serious? Carrie finally asked, breaking the silence. It's legal, Carrie, Anne replied without looking up. It's signed by a notary, sealed, certified. There's no going back. And all of it went to the orphanage? All of it. the $15 million, and she left the house. The deed is still in her name, but she's not here anymore. She left. She took off. And Dad didn't know anything. Anne closed the folder and pushed it towards the center of the table. Her dark, steady eyes didn't blink. Dad knew Grandma wasn't stupid, and yet he thought he could handle her as always. He treated her like a bank account, not a person. Carrie finally sat down, cup in hand, and lowered her gaze. I don't understand why she didn't tell us anything. Because she didn't trust us. Or at least, not him. Anne took a breath. Look at this. She opened her backpack and pulled out a yellow envelope. She slid it across the table. What is that? A letter. I found it among her things. It's addressed to me. Carrie looked at it, surprised. Anne opened it and read aloud. Anne, don't let your father tell you what you're worth. Life takes care of showing everyone the price of their actions. I am leaving in peace. Your grandmother, who always loved you, Mary. Carrie felt a chill. She lowered her gaze. She knew her father was severe, controlling, even selfish, but she had never thought things could get to this point. Do you think she did it for revenge? No, Anne answered, sure of herself. She did it for justice. And what are you going to do? Anne remained silent for a few seconds. Then she stood up from the table, took the documents, and put everything in her backpack. I'm going to find her. How? I don't know. But if she had the courage to leave on her own, to leave everything for something she believed in, the least I can do is look for her and thank her. Carrie nodded in silence. Hours later, Dean arrived home. He opened the door in a hurry and dropped the keys on the console table. The girls were waiting for him, sitting in the living room. He immediately noticed the tension in the atmosphere. What's with the faces? Where is Grandma? Anne asked, without preamble. Dean avoided looking directly at her. He poured himself some water, drank it, and sighed. I don't know. She left. She decided to do something crazy. And now she's out of touch. But don't worry. I'm already doing what's necessary to reverse the situation. Reverse? Carrie interrupted. Are you talking about taking the money from the orphanage? It's not that simple, he said, visibly uncomfortable. It's a legal process. I can't allow... Allow what? Anne cut him off, standing up. Allow an elderly woman to make decisions for herself? To leave you out of an inheritance you don't deserve? Dean looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Watch how you talk to me. No, you watch how you treated your mother. The silence that followed was thick. Carrie's eyes were filled with tears. Anne, firm as an oak. Dean, on the verge of losing control. You don't understand how things work in the real world, he said. Emotions don't pay bills. Your grandmother was being irrational. She squandered a fortune. She didn't squander it, Anne said. She invested it where it was most needed. And that makes her bigger than you. Dean didn't reply. He grabbed his jacket, headed for the door, and closed it with a slam. In the living room, the sisters remained silent for several minutes. Finally, Carrie spoke. What if we don't find her? Anne looked at her with a determined expression. We are going to find her, but not to ask her to come back, but to tell her she is not alone. That same night, while the two sisters were searching online for orphanages near Queens, something unexpected appeared on the screen. A post from the official page of the Children of Hope Home, announcing that, thanks to an anonymous donation, they had been able to repair the facilities and ensure the children's food for at least 3 years. In the image, Among a group of smiling children, barely visible in the background, the face of an elderly woman with grey hair and a serene gaze could be discerned. It didn't mention her name. It had no tag. But Anne recognized her immediately, and she knew she had found the first real clue to reach her grandmother. The morning was cool in Queens. The sky was clear, and the first lights of the sun entered through the windows of the Children of Hope home. Mary got up early, as usual, long before the children, and walked barefoot to the shelter's small garden. She liked to feel the cold earth under her feet. It reminded her of her childhood days, running through the rows of corn in the Pennsylvania countryside, her feet covered in mud and her heart light. She was no longer a young woman, but she had recovered something she hadn't felt for decades: purpose. That morning, Hannah gave her a small notebook and a list of tasks. Nothing forced, just small daily helps: serving breakfast, checking uniforms, sitting down to read with the little ones. Mary didn't need instructions, but she appreciated the gesture. She liked the structure. It made her feel useful. In the dining room, as she placed plastic cups on the long table, she heard a murmur behind her. Turning around, she saw a girl standing in the doorway. She must have been about 8 years old, skinny, with her hair tied in 2 uneven pigtails. She wore an old dress that was once pink, but was now almost white from so many washes. The girl didn't speak, but she watched her carefully, with distrust. "Hello," Mary said, in a soft voice. "What's your name?" The girl didn't answer. She lowered her gaze and took a step back. "I won't hurt you, darling," Mary insisted. "You can come closer if you want. Look, there's bread and milk here." The girl hesitated for a few seconds, but finally entered. She sat at the corner of the table and began to eat without looking up. Hannah, who had just entered with a box of milk under her arm, approached Mary and whispered in her ear. "Her name is Marisol. She arrived 6 weeks ago. She doesn't speak to anyone, only to an old doll she keeps hidden in her backpack. We don't know anything about her family." Mary observed her sideways. There was something about that girl that stirred her chest. She didn't know what. Maybe the way she hunched over to eat, as if she were afraid of being seen. Maybe her eyes, large, dark, sad. Or maybe it was simply that her grandmother's soul had recognized a silent wound. "Can I try to approach her?" Mary asked. "Of course," Hannah replied, "but gently. Marisol is like a scared bird. If you grab her too tight, she'll fly away." For the following days, Mary did exactly that, approaching without pressuring. Every morning she left a napkin with a small pencil drawing for her: a flower, a cat, a smiling sun. Every afternoon, after her tasks, she sat in the garden and knitted in silence, leaving space for Marisol, if she wanted, to sit nearby. And so it happened. First, Marisol sat on the opposite bench, then closer, until one day, without warning, she placed her doll on Mary's lap. "Her name is Kata," the girl said, barely audible. Mary looked at her tenderly and stroked the doll's synthetic hair. "Nice to meet you, Kata. My name is Mary, but you can call me whatever you want." "Grandma?" Mary felt a lump in her throat. "Yes, my dear. If that makes you feel safe, you can call me Grandma." From that day on, Marisol didn't leave her side. She ate next to her, helped her wash the dishes, sat to listen to the stories Mary read to her before bed. No one in the shelter understood how she had managed to get so close. Not even Hannah. But Mary knew. Marisol had an emptiness, and so did she. And sometimes those empties recognize and embrace each other. One afternoon, while sweeping the main entrance, Mary saw a group of volunteers arrive with bags of clothes. In the background, Among the packages, a young man with a baseball cap and dark glasses looked at her attentively. When Mary looked up, he lowered his head and turned, pretending to check something in the van. It was a brief action, almost imperceptible. But Mary's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't Dean. She would have felt it. But there was something about that young man that reminded her of someone, a way of standing, a gesture. She didn't say anything. She kept sweeping. That night, after everyone had left, Mary sat on her bed and wrote in her notebook. Sometimes the past shows up disguised as the future, and you have to be ready to look at it, without fear. She closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. Marisol was sleeping soundly beside her, hugging Qatar to her chest. But somewhere else in Queens, someone else was also looking for answers. Anne had an address, a blurry image from an internet post, and an unwavering premonition. Her grandmother hadn't disappeared. She had just started over. Mary quickly got used to the rhythm of the shelter. She no longer needed to be told what to do. She got up before everyone else, made coffee for the adults, oatmeal with cinnamon for the children, checked the shoes lined up at the entrance, and knitted in her spare time, listening to the laughter and tears that filled the air of the children of Hope Home. Her routine became a refuge, a space of peace she had never had. But what filled her soul the most was Marisol. As the days passed, the girl began to open up. Not much, but enough for Mary to glimpse her past through the cracks. Sometimes, while they played cards or watered the plants in the small vegetable garden Mary organized with the volunteers, Marisol would drop isolated phrases that said more than any direct confession. "My mum used to sing when she cooked, although sometimes she cried at the same time," she said one day, her gaze lost. "What song did she sing?" Mary asked, lowering her voice. "One by Jenny Rivera, the one that says, 'To love and to want are not the same.'" Mary swallowed. She knew that song, and she knew that kind of crying, the crying of women who have no one to tell their sorrows to. "And you?" Mary asked gently. "What did you do when she cried?" "I hid under the bed. I covered my ears, but I always heard her." After that conversation, Mary began to suspect that there was something more behind Marisol's abandonment. It wasn't a common story of being an orphan. There were layers, shadows, wounds that still bled in silence. Days later, while Mary was organizing a small sewing workshop with the older girls, Hannah approached her with an envelope in her hand. "This arrived by mistake with some old papers," she said. "It's addressed to you." Mary took the envelope. It had no return address, just her full name written in childish handwriting. She opened it carefully. Inside was a page torn from a school notebook. The text was short, poorly written, but enough to unleash a storm in her chest. "Mrs. Mary, my mum worked for you many years ago. She told me you were good, that if something happened to her, maybe you would love me. I don't know if that's true, but here I am, Marisol." The handwriting matched the one Marisol used in her drawings. It was hers. Mary sat in silence for a long time. She felt the pieces starting to move. A past she didn't remember clearly forced its way through her memories like an unexpected crack. Who was Marisol's mother? When had she worked with her? Why had she hidden it? That night, Mary searched her box of old photos. She found portraits of seamstresses, nannies, employees who had passed through her house at different stages. But nothing. No face that clearly reminded her of Marisol. Until she found a blurry photo, taken at Dean's birthday when he was young. In the background, almost out of frame, a young woman, with long, loose hair, held a tray of sodas. She had big eyes, like Marisol's. The nose, too. The expression of the mouth. Something about her matched. Mary observed her attentively and felt something she couldn't explain, a mixture of fear, doubt, and a premonition that chilled her spine. She put the photo away and went to Marisol's room. The girl was sleeping, hugging her doll, curled up like a cat. Mary looked at her with tenderness, but also with a new anguish. There was something there, something she still didn't dare to name. The next day, when Hannah found out about the letter, she invited Mary to her office. "Are you sure Marisol's mother worked with you?" "I'm not certain, but my heart tells me yes, and that's enough for me." "What are you planning to do?" "Keep observing. Wait. Listen, girls don't reveal their history like an open book. It opens in fragments, and only when they feel that the person listening won't betray them." Hannah nodded. She knew that kind of wisdom. It didn't come from books, but from wounds healed with effort. Meanwhile, Anne and Carrie already had the address of the shelter. They had confirmed with a social worker that Mary was volunteering there for a few weeks now. Anne was ready to go, but Carrie hesitated. "What if she doesn't want to see us?" "We're not going to pressure her. I just want her to know we're here, that not everyone left her alone." "What about Dad?" Anne made a face. "Dad has nothing to do with this." They packed a backpack with a few things they thought Mary might need. Family photos, a hand cream she always used, and a small bottle of lavender essence they gave her every Christmas. Anne also packed her letter, the one her grandmother had left her. She felt she had to give it back to her in person. That afternoon they set off for the Children of Hope home, unaware that their arrival would not only reopen old emotions, but also secrets that, until that moment, Mary had kept buried even from herself. Dean woke up with a feeling he couldn't identify. It wasn't anger, although his frown persisted from days past. It wasn't sadness, although the silence of the house weighed heavier each morning. It was something else, something deeper. Maybe shame, maybe fear. He hadn't slept well since his mother left. He had dreamed of her several times, but not as she was lately, but as she was when he was a child. Smiling, carrying him in her arms, serving him hot chocolate with anise bread. In the dream, he asked her something, but he couldn't hear the answer. He always woke up just before she spoke. That morning, without having coffee, without even changing clothes, Dean locked himself in his study and spread a blank sheet of paper on the desk. At the top, he wrote in capital letters, "Where are you, Mum?" Below, he began to draw arrows, connections, names. He forced himself to think as he did in his business deals. Every clue, every conversation, every action must have a logical consequence. If she had left, she had done so with a purpose. And if he wanted to find her, he had to stop looking for her as a son and start looking for her as a strategist. The first thing was to check the call history. There was an unknown number that appeared 2 days before her disappearance. He wrote it down. Then he checked the bank statements. His mother didn't use credit cards, but she did have a modest savings account. The bank movements showed a direct transfer to an institution named Hope Foundation, Inc. It wasn't a familiar name. He looked it up online. It only took seconds to find it. It was the legal name of the Children of Hope home. Dean closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He felt a heat rising up his neck. It was the same sensation he got when he was about to close a multi-million-dollar deal or when he detected that someone was trying to circumvent him. This time, however, the play had been against him, and it had taken him by surprise. He opened a new folder on his computer. He began compiling all the information about the shelter: address, history, local press notes. He found a recent publication that talked about an anonymous donation that had saved the place from permanent closure. They didn't mention names, but they did mention dates. They matched his mother's disappearance. He stood up, paced the room, grabbed his coat, and left the house without saying a word to anyone. Driving down the highway toward Queens, his mind was racing at 1,000 miles per hour. He didn't plan to cause a scene. Not yet. First, he wanted to confirm she was there. Then he would see if it was possible to persuade her, pressure her, even move her. It hurt him to admit it, but his strategy was no longer just about money. There was something else. Maybe it was wounded pride. Maybe it was the emptiness. Upon arriving at the shelter, he parked a block away. He didn't want to attract attention. He walked to the entrance gate. He rang the bell with 2 fingers above Shaggy and waited. A kind but cautious young volunteer received him. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Mrs. Hannah. I'm Dean Gonzalez." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important. Urgent, in fact." The young man led him to an improvised waiting room with broken but clean sofas. There were children's drawings taped to the walls, an old television in one corner, and a pile of backpacks in another. He waited 10 minutes that felt like an eternity. Hannah entered with a firm step. She carried a folder under her arm and an expression that left no room for games. "Are you Mary Gonzalez's son?" "Yes, and I came to look for her." "She's not here," she replied without hesitation. "Where is she?" "I don't know. And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Dean stood up abruptly. "She is my mother. And she's an adult woman. She made a decision of her own free will. You pressured her, you ignored her, and when she finally did something for herself, now you come to undo it. You don't know me." "I don't need to know you, Mr. Gonzalez. I know how your mother got here. I know how she lived those days. I know how her hands trembled when she signed the papers, and how her eyes filled with tears when she talked about her granddaughter, Anne." Dean swallowed. "Anne was here?" "She called us. She asked if her grandmother was okay. She didn't ask to see her. She just wanted to know if she was cared for." "And Carrie?" "She didn't mention her." Dean brought a hand to his forehead. He felt everything crumbling. His mother, his daughters, even his authority. Everything was slipping away. Hannah extended a sheet of paper to him. "Here is the legal deed of the donation, in case you were thinking of suing us." "I didn't say that." "But you thought it." Dean took the paper without looking. He wanted to talk. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. But he did nothing. He left the shelter as he entered, alone. That night, in a cheap hotel on the outskirts of Queens, he opened his cell phone to check emails. But there were no important ones. Only one, with no subject, from an unknown account. Opening it, he found a single line. "She is no longer yours. She never was." The sender was anonymous, but the body of the message was written in a voice he recognized, the voice of someone who knew the secrets he thought were buried, and who was willing to unearth them. Anne and Carrie got off the bus with their backpacks slung over their shoulders and their eyes restless. The address they had gotten for the shelter was not far, but they decided to walk. Anne said she needed to think. Carrie just wanted to avoid running into their father at that moment. "Do you think she'll receive us?" Carrie asked as they crossed a street with closed businesses and scraggly trees. "I don't know, but I need to see her, to hear her, to know she's okay." "Dad is furious," Carrie murmured. "I heard him talking to a lawyer. He wants to get back what's his." Anne stopped. The phrase struck a chord. "And what do you think?" she asked her, turning seriously. Carrie shrugged, as if afraid to answer. I miss Grandma. I don't know if what she did was right, but I understand her. Sometimes Dad treats everyone like they're part of a plan. He doesn't listen. He doesn't look. Anne nodded, and without saying anything else, they continued walking. Upon reaching the gate of the Children of Hope home, they rang the bell timidly. A young volunteer opened up, somewhat suspicious. "Are you looking for someone?" "We came to see our grandmother, Mary Gonzalez," Anne said firmly. "We know she's here." The young man was silent for a second. Then he nodded. "Come in. Wait a moment, please." He led them to a small room with children's books, old armchairs, and a table full of crayons. He offered them water, but both declined. Their nerves were frayed. Mary entered minutes later, unannounced. She was wearing a simple blouse and an apron stained with paint. When she saw the two of them, she stopped. Her eyes immediately welled up, but she didn't say a word. Anne was the first to break the ice. "Grandma." Mary approached slowly. She hugged them tightly, as if time stood still. There were no reproaches, no questions, just a reunion. "I thought you wouldn't look for me," Mary whispered. "I thought you didn't want us to," Anne replied. "I wanted to protect you. From your father. From my mistakes. From me." Carrie approached with the backpack. "We brought you this, and the letter you left me." Mary took it with trembling hands. She took out the lavender bottle and smelled it with her eyes closed. Then she read the letter carefully. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know what this means to me." They spent the afternoon together. Mary introduced them to Hannah, to the children, showed them the small vegetable patch and the reading corner where she spent the afternoons with Marisol. Anne quickly noticed the closeness between the two. "Is she—" "Yes, she is special. Very special." Mary didn't say more, but Anne noticed a strange sparkle in her grandmother's eyes, as if there was something more she wasn't ready to tell. When the sun began to set, the sisters said goodbye. Mary asked them not to tell Dean anything for the moment. "Not because I fear him, but because I know he is not ready to hear what I have to tell him." Anne nodded. Carrie did too. Returning home, they were expected with the door open. Dean was in the living room, phone in hand, his face tense. "Where were you?" "We went to see Grandma," Anne said frankly. "Without my permission?" "She doesn't need your permission to exist, Dad." Dean stood up abruptly. "You're getting involved in matters you don't understand." "No, Dad. You're the one who doesn't understand. You think everything is about ownership, control. But Grandma did what you never had the courage to do. Let go. She manipulated you. She's using you." "And you? Haven't you done the same with us all your life?" The silence was like a dry punch. Carrie wanted to intervene, but Anne had already said what she had to say. She went up to her room without looking back. Dean was left alone in the living room. He checked his phone. He read the anonymous email again. He felt the lump in his throat again. And then, as if a part of him finally broke, he sat down and he cried. What he still ignored was that, in an old box stored in Mary's room, Hannah had just found a notebook that didn't belong to the grandmother, but to Robert. A diary that contained confessions that, upon coming to light, would rewrite the entire history of the Gonzalez family. The afternoon fell slowly over the Children of Hope home. A warm breeze entered through the open windows of the old wing of the building, where Hannah had decided to do some deep cleaning. That sector had been closed for months, full of boxes, shelves with forgotten papers, dusty archives from previous years. Mary offered to help, and between the two of them, they took out everything that wasn't useful. Broken toys, outdated textbooks, ownerless backpacks, faded photographs. In a box marked personal donations, Hannah found a leather-bound notebook with the initials R.A. engraved on a corner. At first she thought it was some old accounting record, but as she casually flipped through it, something caught her attention. They weren't numbers or lists. They were paragraphs, long, personal writings. "Mary," she murmured, the notebook in her hands. "Do these initials sound familiar?" Mary looked up from a corner where she was organizing folders. "R.A.G.," she repeated. "Those are my husband's initials, Robert Anthony Gonzalez." Hannah handed it to her carefully. Mary received it as if it were a sacred relic. She opened it with trembling hands. The first page read, in firm, masculine handwriting, "I started this diary because there are things I don't dare to tell anyone, not even Mary. Maybe someday, when I'm gone, someone will find these words and understand what I could never explain out loud." Mary remained silent. Her breathing became heavier. Hannah approached, but she raised a hand. "I need to read this alone," she said. She went up to her room, closed the door, and sat in front of the small window that overlooked the inner courtyard. There, while the children played below, Mary began to read. The diary was not a common memoir. It was a confession. Page after page, Robert recounted his life since he married Mary, his fears, his frustration at not having been able to give her the life she deserved, his regret for his absences, and the most difficult thing of all, the story of another woman. "I didn't plan to fall in love with someone else, but it happened. Her name was Teresa. She was young, sweet, fragile. It wasn't just a slip. It was something more. She worked in the same factory where I had started as a maintenance supervisor. One day it just happened. One afternoon she told me she was pregnant. I didn't know what to do." Mary stopped reading. She closed the notebook for a moment. Her hands were sweating, her whole body was shaking, but not from cold. It was a tremor that came from within, from a place that had been dormant for decades. She took a deep breath and opened it again. "I didn't have the courage to tell Mary. I thought that if I walked away from Teresa, everything would resolve itself. I gave her some money. I promised to help her start over somewhere else. And I asked her not to contact me again. She left. I never knew if she had the baby. I just knew she disappeared from Queens. But since then, every time I see Dean, every time I hear him talk to Mary without gratitude, I wonder if that other son, or daughter, would have been different." Tears began to fall. It wasn't just pain. It was a silent collapse. The man she shared her life with had lied to her. But beyond that, there was a shadow that now took shape, a latent possibility, a life that could have been connected to hers without her knowing it. She put the notebook in the drawer. She dried her tears and went down to the kitchen. Marisol was playing alone at the table, drawing with crayons. When she saw her, she smiled shyly. Mary approached her and stroked her head. "How are you, my love?" "Good, Grandma. I'm drawing your tree." "My tree?" "Yes. You told me that all people come from a big tree, one that has branches everywhere." Mary smiled, although inside she felt her own tree was swaying. "And what does it look like?" "Like this," Marisol said, and showed her the drawing. They were long, twisted branches with blue leaves. In the center, a strong trunk with a hand-drawn heart, and at the top, a separate branch, as if barely hanging by a thread. Mary pointed to it. "And this one?" "That's me," Marisol replied softly. "I'm missing a rope so I don't fall." Mary didn't answer. She just took her hand. That night, she returned to the diary. She read it completely. On the last page, an underlined sentence. There are secrets that weigh more than guilt. But maybe, if one day someone dares to open this box, they can make peace with what I couldn't face. Mary closed the notebook with determination. The next day, Anne returned to the shelter. Mary was waiting for her. I need you to help me look for someone, she told her. A woman named Teresa. She worked with your grandfather more than 30 years ago. And maybe, just maybe, she is the mother of a girl you already know. Anne looked at her in silence. Are you saying? I don't know, Mary replied. But if it's true, then Marisol could be much more than a child under my care. She could be family, blood. And if that were the case, Mary knew that the foundations of her history were about to shatter forever. Mary spent almost the entire night awake. After reading Robert's diary for the third time, her mind wouldn't let her rest. Every word written by her husband, every confession hidden between the lines, resonated in her chest like an echo of a past she never suspected. She got up before dawn, as always, but that day she didn't go straight to prepare breakfast or check the children's chores. She went to the small closet in her room, where she kept a shoebox she hadn't opened since arriving at the shelter. The box contained old photographs, some wrinkled, others faded. Many of them were family memories: Dean's birthdays, short trips to Pennsylvania, Christmas parties with cousins and neighbors. Mary calmly took them out one by one. She knew what she was looking for, even if she didn't say it out loud. And then she found it. A forgotten photo, hidden in the folds of a Christmas card. It was a black and white image, taken with a cheap camera, poorly centered, but enough to clearly see the essentials. In the image, a group of employees from the factory where Robert had worked were posing during a lunch. Mary didn't remember seeing that image before, but she instantly recognized her husband, standing in the background, his arm casually resting on the back of a chair. Next to him, sitting, was a young woman with long hair, big eyes, and a shy smile. The same woman who appeared in the background of an old photo of Dean's birthday. Mary brought the photo closer to the lamp. That woman was Teresa. She felt a punch in her stomach. She stood up, went straight to the desk, and placed the photo next to the diary. She took a sheet of paper and began writing names, dates, fragments of memories. Teresa had worked at home as a temporary assistant during a time when Mary was sick, not for long, maybe a couple of months, before suddenly disappearing. At the time, Mary had believed she left by choice. But now, everything took on another meaning. As she reviewed those memories, someone gently knocked on the door. Mary, it was Hannah. Can I come in? Yes, come in. Hannah entered with a folder in her hand. A formal request to visit the shelter arrived yesterday. It's from Dean. He says he wants to come talk to you and Marisol. Mary closed her eyes. She clenched her jaw. Marisol? Why? He doesn't say. He just insists that he needs to clarify something important. Mary felt a chill. She knew Dean never took a step without a strategy. If he had asked to see Marisol, it was because he knew something or suspected more than he let on. I don't want him near her, she said firmly. Not without me present. I understand. And what about you? Are you going to receive him? Mary didn't answer immediately. I still don't know. Hannah nodded without pressing. She left the folder on the table and left. Shortly after, while Mary was serving breakfast in the dining room, Marisol approached her with a drawing in her hand. It was a portrait of a woman with long hair, hugging a girl. The woman was facing away, but the girl's face had identical features to Marisol's. "Who is she?" Mary asked, sitting next to her. "My mum," the girl whispered. "I dreamed about her last night. She told me not to be afraid, that I already had a new family." Mary swallowed. "Did she tell you anything else?" "Yes, to listen to you, that you had something to tell me." Mary felt her heart pounding in her throat. She stroked the girl's head gently. "Very soon, my dear. Very soon I'll tell you everything." That same afternoon, Anne returned to the shelter. Mary was waiting for her in the courtyard. "Did you find her?" the young woman asked. "Yes," Mary replied, showing her the photo. "It's her, Teresa, Marisol's mother." Anne observed it closely. Her face tightened. "She's very similar," she murmured. "And what are you going to do?" "I need to confirm if what I suspect is real, and if so, I have to be prepared to face the truth, even if it hurts." "And Dean?" "He already requested to come, but if he does, it will be under my conditions. This time he won't impose his version of the story." Anne nodded. Then she leaned over the table and took something out of her bag. "I found this among Dad's old things. A copy of a birth certificate with cross-outs, signed by a woman named Teresa del Rio, and the father's name is blank." Mary took it with trembling hands. She read it once, twice. The date matched. The place, too. And the name of the baby, Marisol. That night, Mary returned to her room and placed the photo, the diary, Marisol's birth certificate, and the girl's drawing of the family tree on the table. She had feared many things in her life: loneliness, rejection, ingratitude. But nothing scared her as much as the possibility that that girl whom she loved as one of her own could be her granddaughter, by blood. And if she was, then the story was about to change not only for her, but for everyone. The sky over Queens dawned grey, cloudy, as if guessing that day was not going to be calm for anyone. At the shelter, breakfast proceeded with some normality, children laughing, others fighting over the last pastry, caregivers hurrying to serve warm milk and oatmeal. But Mary was not in the kitchen that morning. She had stayed in her room, sitting in front of the table with all the papers spread out. Robert's diary, the photo of Teresa, Marisol's birth certificate, and the image the girl had drawn of the family tree. Hannah entered without knocking. She knew her well enough to know when silence needed to be broken. "Did you sleep at all?" "Just enough not to faint," Mary replied, without taking her eyes off the documents. "Have you decided what you're going to do?" Mary took a moment to answer. "I'm going to ask for a DNA test." "Are you sure?" "I don't want assumptions anymore. If Marisol is Dean's daughter, I have the right to know. And so does she." Hannah nodded. "I support you in everything." Elsewhere in the city, Dean was in the office of a well-known lawyer for shady cases. The man, in an expensive suit and with an insolent gaze, was flipping through the donation documents Dean had given him the afternoon before. "Look, what your mother did was legal. Yes. But there are ways to reverse it," he said, in the tone of someone who had done this more than once. "Like what?" "Suing for emotional incapacity, arguing that she acted under pressure, presenting medical reports that say she was not in full judgment, or even better, saying she was a victim of manipulation." "Manipulation by whom?" "The director of the shelter, a granddaughter, whoever. The point is to sow doubt, make noise, apply pressure." Dean listened to him with clenched teeth. He wanted to recover that money, not just out of greed, but out of pride. His mother had publicly defied him, in front of the whole family, in front of himself, and that was not done to a man like him. How much would this cost me? A considerable sum. But if we win, you'll be returned control of the assets, and you could even sell the property and divide it as you wish. Dean hesitated. He thought of his daughters, of Anne, of Carrie, the way they looked at him lately, as if they no longer respected him. Do it, he finally said. The lawyer smiled. Very well, I'll take care of it. That same afternoon, a court official arrived at the shelter with a document in hand. Hannah received him at the entrance. It was a legal notification. Dean Gonzalez had filed a civil lawsuit requesting the annulment of the donation due to alleged manipulation and mental deterioration of Mrs. Mary Gonzalez. Is this serious? Hannah asked, reading the paper. Very serious. You will have to appear before a judge in 15 days, the official said, apologetically. I'm just doing my job. Hannah immediately went upstairs with the document. Mary read it without flinching. She only looked up when she finished. I expected it. He was always like this. When he can't control something, he destroys it. What are we going to do? We are going to prepare. But I'm not going to spend what little I have on lawyers. He's already taken enough from me. He's not going to take my dignity. Hannah was about to respond, but at that moment, Marisol entered running, with an envelope in her hand. Grandma, a letter arrived for you. Mary took it and remained silent upon seeing the sender. It was from a woman named Cindy Del Rio in Detroit. Del Rio? Hannah asked. Mary nodded slowly. Teresa Del Rio. That letter could be the first real clue to confirm the truth. She opened it with trembling hands. The content was brief. My name is Cindy. I am Teresa's niece. I know who Marisol is, and I know who her father is. If you want answers, come. But come alone. Teresa is gone, but I can tell you what she couldn't in life. Mary carefully put the letter away. She looked at Hannah. I need to go to Detroit. And Marisol? She'll come with me. What if Dean finds out? Then let him find out. It's time for all of us to stop living a lie. The next day, before dawn, Mary packed a small backpack with just enough: light clothing, a bottle of her heart medication, her notebook, and the photograph of Robert with Teresa. Marisol slept beside her, still unaware that they were about to take a trip that would change their lives forever. Meanwhile, Dean received an unexpected call. Mr. Gonzalez, a nervous voice said on the other end. We have a problem. The judge has requested a verification of your mother's mental state before proceeding with the lawsuit, and the court psychologist has already spoken with the shelter director. Things don't look good for your case. Dean gripped the phone tightly. What does that mean? That if she proves she is lucid, you will not only lose the lawsuit, you could be accused of legal abuse against a senior citizen. And that was a shadow he wasn't even willing to face. But what he still didn't know was that his mother and the girl he had ignored so much were, at that very moment, on their way to discover a bond that would destroy him from within. A bond that would force him to look in the mirror and not recognize himself. The journey from Queens to Detroit was silent. Mary looked out the bus window while Marisol slept with her head resting on her arm. The landscape slid by slowly, but her mind raced. She thought of Cindy, of Teresa, of Robert, of Marisol, and of Dean. Everything was tangled up in a single question she still didn't dare to fully articulate. What if Marisol was really Dean's daughter? Not granddaughter, not just shared blood, direct daughter, his own flesh and blood, the result of a betrayal that no one had spoken of for decades. That idea forced her to keep her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if she feared losing her balance within herself. They arrived in Detroit after 9 o'clock in the morning. The shelter had managed to borrow a small van to take them from the terminal to the address Cindy had written in the letter. It was a modest house, with a red brick facade, closed curtains, and a dry potted plant at the entrance. It didn't look inhabited, but when Mary knocked on the door, someone answered from inside with a trembling voice. "Who is it?" "Mary Gonzalez. I came because of what you wrote, and I brought Marisol." There was silence. Then the sound of a bolt sliding. The door opened just enough for a woman about 60 years old, thin, with a pale face and deep dark circles under her eyes, to peek out. "Come in." They entered. The interior was dark but clean. A small living room, 2 old armchairs, a table with a plastic tablecloth, and a cabinet with porcelain figurines. Cindy didn't offer coffee or water. She went straight to the point. "Teresa talked to me about you many times. She always said that if something ever happened to her, the only thing she wanted was for her daughter to be safe, that if possible, she should reach you someday." "Did she know I was Robert's wife?" Cindy nodded slowly. She knew it from the beginning, but she didn't want to cause trouble. She said he never promised anything, that it was a mistake, a weakness. But when she found out about the pregnancy, he gave her money, yes, but he also asked her to leave, and she obeyed, because she loved him, and she didn't want to destroy his family. And what happened to Teresa? She died a year ago. Cancer. She never wanted to tell anyone who Marisol's father was, not even the girl. But days before she died, she confessed everything to me. She asked me to look for the name Mary Gonzalez. She left me a box with papers, letters, photos, and Marisol's birth certificate with no father's name. Mary felt her heart tighten. She took Marisol's hand. Did she know who her father was? Yes, she always knew. Robert. But she also said that if Dean ever found out, he would never accept that girl, that he would be capable of rejecting her just as he did her own mother. Cindy opened a drawer and took out a small wooden box. She handed it to Mary. "Here is everything Teresa left behind. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but if you allow me to say something, that girl deserves to know where she comes from. Because what is not named rots." Mary took the box and nodded. "Thank you. I don't know how I'm going to face what comes next, but I know this cannot be hidden anymore." They returned to Queen's at dusk. Hannah was waiting for them at the shelter entrance with a frown. "We have a problem." Mary got out of the van with Marisol asleep in her arms. "What happened now?" "Dean. He went to the courthouse. He threatened to accuse us of fraud. But the worst part is not that. The judge has already ordered both parties to appear at a hearing, and he's bringing witnesses." "What witnesses?" "A paid doctor. He says you're mentally ill, that the donation was the result of an imbalance." Mary closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. "It's not just about the money anymore, is it?" "No. Now it's about power, about pride, about proving that he can still control something." That night, Mary didn't sleep. She opened the wooden box Cindy had given her. Inside, she found letters from Teresa to Robert, a baby bracelet with the name Marisol hand-carved, a photo of Teresa with the girl in her arms, a childhood portrait, a portrait that made her tremble. The girl in the photo had Dean's eyes, identical. That image was the living proof that no lawyer could erase. Marisol was not only Teresa's daughter, she was Dean's daughter, and if he didn't know it, he was about to discover it in the worst possible way. Because in the next hearing, Mary was determined to reveal everything, with documents, with words, and with the gaze of a girl who would change everything. The day of the hearing arrived with a heavy atmosphere. It was neither hot nor cold, but the air felt charged with something indefinable. The Queen's family court was more crowded than usual. The hallways were a hustle of lawyers, secretaries, court employees, and families crossed by similar stories, but none like the one about to unfold in courtroom number 4. Mary arrived with the support of Hannah, Anne, and the volunteer legal director of the shelter, a young lawyer named Ingrid, who offered to represent her without charging a single cent. Mary dressed simply, a white blouse, a grey skirt, and her blue scarf. She carried a folder in her hand with the documents Cindy had given her, plus Marisol's birth certificate, Teresa's letters, and the photograph that had unearthed the truth. Marisol did not attend. Mary had decided it was not yet time to expose her. Dean arrived accompanied by his private lawyer, dressed in a suit and with an arrogant expression. He carried a thick briefcase full of papers, manipulated medical reports, certificates signed by a supposed psychiatrist that Mary had traits of age-related emotional deterioration. They didn't greet each other. Upon entering the courtroom, the judge, a man with a tired face and an honest gaze, received them with a brief and formal introduction. He asked for mutual respect and clarified that he was there not to mediate family emotions, but to evaluate the legal validity of the donation made by Mary to the Children of Hope Home. Mrs. Mary Gonzalez, the judge began, do you ratify that the donation was made by your own will, without coercion, and in full possession of your faculties? I ratify it, Your Honor, Mary said with a clear voice, without a single hesitation. Can you explain why? Mary took a deep breath. She opened her folder and took out a handwritten page. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was a direct testimony. I donated that money because I have lived long enough to know that there are things that cannot be bought, but can be sown. My son told me I was too old to enjoy it. Maybe he's right, but I still have a heart to share. I didn't do this out of spite or out of madness. I did it because these children, the ones at the shelter, gave me back faith in something I thought was lost, tenderness. They didn't ask me what I was worth or what I had. They just offered me their company, and that was more than my own son gave me in years. A murmur was heard in the courtroom. The judge called for silence. Mr. Dean Gonzalez, the judge continued, your lawyer maintains that your mother was manipulated. Do you have concrete evidence? Beyond the medical evidence, Your Honor, the lawyer said, there is the fact that the lady was emotionally induced by people at the shelter. This decision represents a significant loss of assets for her direct family. And what do you say, Mr. Gonzalez? The judge asked directly. Dean swallowed. His face was tense, but for the first time he seemed unsure. I just believe that my mother deserved something better than ending up in a shelter, surrounded by strangers. And why weren't you there to prevent it? The silence that followed was so deep that a pen could be heard dropping to the floor. Dean did not answer. The judge nodded and called a recess of 10 minutes. Everyone went out into the hallway. Mary walked toward the court's internal garden. She needed air. Anne followed her. Hannah, too. You're doing great, Grandma, Anne told her. You look stronger than ever. I don't feel strong. I feel at peace, Mary replied. At that moment, Dean appeared in front of them. He was alone, without his lawyer. His face was distraught. He approached slowly. Can I talk to you? He asked Mary. She hesitated. Hannah and Anne didn't move. Mary raised a hand. Leave us alone for a moment. When they were face to face, Dean lowered his gaze. Why? Mary looked him straight in the eyes. Because you never wanted to listen. You never asked about the past. You just took it for granted that the world revolved around you. And Marisol? Is she, Yes, Mary interrupted without hesitation. She is your daughter, and no, you don't need a genetic test to know it. Look at her. Listen to her. Feel her presence. She is yours. And you abandoned her long before you met her." Dean was speechless. He sat on the bench next to her. For an instant, he seemed younger, more vulnerable, more human. "I didn't know," he whispered. "If you had known, what would you have done? Would you have forced Teresa to be silent? Would you have accused her of lying? Would you have ignored her as you did me?" Dean closed his eyes. 2 tears descended slowly. "I'm not as bad as you think. No, you're worse. Because you knew. Deep down, you always knew. That night, when she hinted at it at the factory, you looked at her with fear. And then you ran away, just as you ran away from me when I stopped being useful to you." Dean broke down, crying in silence. No one else saw them. "Can I see her?" he asked after a few minutes. "Not today. Not now. First, sort things out with yourself. And then, we'll see if she wants to see you." Mary stood up and returned to the courtroom. Dean remained there, alone, with his face in his hands, knowing that the truth, the one he had wanted to bury for years, now enveloped him entirely and would never let him go. When the judge returned to the room, he delivered his decision in a firm voice. "The donation is legal. The case is closed." But Mary knew that the legal part was not the end of anything. The real part was just beginning. And in the room next door, Marisol had unintentionally heard everything. Standing behind the half-open door, she finally understood what no one had told her out loud. Her father had a name, and he could no longer hide. The return to the shelter after the hearing was not a typical return. Mary's face, although serene, revealed the exhaustion of having sustained years of silence and days of emotional tension without crumbling. Hannah insisted that she lie down, at least for a while. Anne prepared her chamomile tea and brought her a blanket. Mary agreed without arguing. It wasn't surrender, it was self-care. Marisol approached without saying a word. She sat on the edge of the bed, her head bowed, without letting go of her doll, Kata. "Did you know?" she asked in a very low voice. Mary opened her eyes. She didn't need the girl to say more. "I found out recently, but I suspected it before." "So it's true? He's my dad?" Mary took a moment to answer. Then she extended her hand and took Marisol's in hers. "Yes, my dear, it's true." Marisol swallowed. Her eyes reddened immediately. "And why did he never want me?" "Because he didn't know how. Because he was afraid. Because he wasn't ready to be the man you deserved." Marisol cried in silence, that deep cry that only strong girls allow themselves when they are sure no one will judge them. Mary hugged her with all the love of her old but firm body. "And will he love me now?" "That only he can decide. But you are not obliged to accept him immediately. You can wait. You can ask. You can choose." Marisol felt her, without speaking. They stayed like that for a few minutes, in that embrace that contained entire generations of wounds, until Mary felt dizzy. She tried to sit up, but her body did not respond with its usual agility. "Oh dear," she whispered, bringing her hand to her chest. "Grandma?" Marisol said, alarmed. Mary leaned against the headboard of the bed. She was breathing with difficulty. Her face, usually flushed from the sun and daily work, paled. Hannah, hearing the girl's tone, immediately entered. She saw Mary leaning over, her lips dry, her eyes half closed. "Anne, call an ambulance!" In a matter of minutes, the entire shelter turned into a whirlwind of voices, calls, and hurried footsteps. The children were taken out of the hallway. Hannah held Mary's arm, who barely murmured scattered words. "Don't go, Mary, do you hear me? Don't go." "The box, the letters," she said with effort. "Don't let them get lost." Anne, cell phone to her ear and hands trembling, repeated the address to the emergency operator. "Does she have a history of heart problems? Suspected heart attack?" The ambulance arrived in less than 15 minutes, but to everyone, it seemed like half a lifetime. Mary was carried out on a stretcher, with Marisol crying at the foot of the vehicle, and Hannah trying to calm her down without breaking down herself. Dean found out that same afternoon. A dry call from Hannah, without frills. "She's at Mount Sinai Hospital. She's serious. And if you care about her as a human being, more than as a son, come." He didn't respond immediately. He was alone, in his office, surrounded by papers that now seemed absurd to him. His world, so structured, so defined by contracts, rents, and inheritances, had begun to crumble. He stood up, grabbed his car keys, and left without thinking. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Anne sitting in the waiting room. Her gaze cut him like a knife. "How is she?" he asked. "We don't know. She's under observation. The doctors said her heart was already compromised, that this stress could have been the trigger." "And you?" Dean said, lowering his voice. "Do you think it was me?" "I don't think it. I know it." Dean swallowed hard. "I didn't want this, Anne." "No. You just wanted to be right." More than 2 hours passed until a nurse came out to give news. "She stabilized, but she needs absolute rest. She cannot receive visitors today. Only one person can go in for 5 minutes, if the family allows it." Anne looked at Hannah, who had arrived minutes earlier. Both knew what they had to do, and despite the pain, the pride, the wounds, they nodded. Dean entered the room in silence. Mary was sleeping. Her face was fragile, but serene. She seemed younger, as if the rest had taken years off her. He approached her, took her hand, and for the first time in a long time, he spoke from the soul. "Mum, I ruined everything. I thought I could control the story, like I control my businesses. But with you, I never understood that all you needed was for me to see you as a woman, not as a burden." Mary didn't open her eyes, but her lips moved. "Dean? I'm here. Forgive me. For Teresa. For Marisol. For everything." Mary squeezed his hand with the little strength she had left. "Just don't repeat with her what you did with me." Dean lowered his head. "I won't." He stayed there until a nurse escorted him out. Outside, Hannah was waiting for him with a folder in her hand. "What is that?" he asked. "Your mother's updated will. Don't worry, you're not left out of it." Dean looked at her, surprised. "What do you mean I'm not?" "Everything is in the shelter's name, as you already knew, but she also left a section for Marisol, with your last name." Dean was speechless. The blow was as strong as it was just. And as he walked away down the hallway, he understood that that last name, which he found so hard to share, now had a new meaning, because that girl didn't just carry his blood, she carried his redemption. The hospital was silent when Marisol entered. It wasn't the first time she had been to a medical center, but this time was different. Her hand was sweating inside Hannah's. She walked without letting go, with short steps, her heart racing, and a feeling she didn't know if it was fear or something deeper. The nurse on duty guided her to room 312. The door was ajar. Through the crack, Mary could be seen sleeping, her face turned toward the window, the IV dripping slowly. "You can go in, but only for a little while," the nurse said. "She's stable, but needs rest." Marisol let go of Hannah's hand and entered. The room smelled of disinfectant and lavender. There was a bouquet of flowers on the nightstand, with a card that read, "We're waiting for you." Anne had written it that morning. Marisol approached the bed in silence. She sat in the chair and kept looking at her. Mary didn't look sick. She looked fragile, yes, but serene, as if her body was finally resting after carrying a lifetime of decisions, secrets, and battles. Marisol lowered her head. She thought about everything she had heard behind that door in the courthouse. The word "dad" had been echoing in her chest ever since, as if she didn't know what to do with it. Because having a father now didn't mean the same thing as for other children. For her, it was a crack that began with abandonment and that now opened with a new question. Could she really forgive? She took a sheet of paper folded in 4 from her backpack. It was a letter, not for Mary, not for Dean. It was for herself. Dear Marisol, you are not invisible. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are strong. You are brave. And you deserve the truth. And even if it hurts, I prefer to know who I am than to live wondering. Mary opened her eyes just as the girl finished reading in a low voice. Marisol looked at her without startling. Are you better? Yes, my dear, Mary replied in a low voice. Since when are you so wise? Since I learned to listen without being spoken to. Mary smiled faintly. Your mother would be proud. And you? Marisol asked, her voice firm. More than you can imagine. Marisol took a deep breath. I want to know everything. Are you ready? I have been for a long time. Mary asked her to take the box that was on the dresser. It was the same one she had brought from Detroit, the one that contained the letters, the baby bracelet, the photos. Everything you need to know is here, but I'm also here, to fill in what the papers don't say. Marisol opened the box carefully. She took out the contents one by one. When she picked up the photograph of her mother with her in her arms, she stopped. Did she suffer much? Yes, but she was also brave and loving. She protected you as best she could, until the end. Marisol didn't cry. She just lowered her head. Then she looked up and asked, And him? Did he love me? Mary didn't answer immediately. She stroked her hair and then said, Sometimes adults break inside and don't know how to love. Dean didn't know, but he can learn if you let him. I don't know if I want to. You are not obliged. Marisol closed the box and put it on her lap. I want you to promise me something. Anything you want. That if you're ever gone, they won't force me to go with him. Mary looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded. I promise you. But I also promise you that I will do everything possible so that you don't have to miss me anytime soon. Marisol got up and hugged her carefully. Then she left the room without saying anything else. In the hallway, Anne and Carrie were waiting, sitting down. Marisol approached them, showed them the box, and said, It's time for all of us to know the same thing. The 3 of them went down to the common area of the hospital, sat on a bench in the internal garden, and began reading Teresa's letters together. The first was a confession written weeks before she died. There she recounted how she had met Robert, how Dean rejected her upon learning of the pregnancy, and how Mary, without knowing it, was always the figure she hoped her daughter would have someday. Meanwhile, Dean was in his car, parked in front of the hospital. He hadn't wanted to go back in since the night before. He had written and deleted the same message more than 10 times. Marisol, I want to meet you, not as your father, as someone who wants to learn to deserve you. He didn't dare to send it. He looked out the window. He saw Anne, Carrie, and Marisol leaving the hospital together, laughing at something only they knew. He saw the box in their hands. He knew what it meant. And then he lowered his head onto the steering wheel and understood that the true inheritance his mother was leaving him was not land, or stocks, or money. It was an opportunity. And opportunities, when lost, don't always return. But sometimes, if you dare to face them, you can still reach them. The next time Marisol looked him in the eyes, there would be no room for excuses, only for truth and for forgiveness, if it was still possible. The wooden box Marisol held in her hands seemed heavier than ever, not because of its size, but because of what it carried inside: the truth. Teresa's letters, her mother, were not simply pages written with ink. They were pieces of a life that Marisol was just beginning to understand. That night, back at the shelter, she asked no one to accompany her to her room. She wanted to read alone, to understand in her own way. Mary, though worried about her health, respected her decision. She knew that this battle was intimate, and that the girl she had cared for in recent months was no longer the same. She had crossed an invisible threshold, and although she was still small, her gaze now had something adult about it. Marisol sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and took out the letters one by one. The first, dated 10 years ago, was addressed to Mary, but it was never sent. "Mrs. Mary, I don't know if you remember who I am. My name is Teresa Del Rio. I worked with you when I was sick and needed urgent employment. You welcomed me without knowing me and gave me work and shelter. I never forgot it. After what happened with your husband, I made the decision to leave, not to run away, but to prevent you from suffering more. But when my daughter was born, everything changed. I thought many times about coming back, about knocking on your door, about leaving the girl with you and disappearing. But I wasn't able to. Not because I was a coward, but because I still loved you too much. Not as a rival, as a woman. You were everything I would have wanted to be. Strong, dignified, a mother. Forgive me." Marisol pressed the paper against her chest. Her face was bathed in tears, but she wasn't crying from sorrow. It was something else. Something similar to understanding, to acceptance. It was as if every line she read helped her reconstruct something that had always been incomplete inside her. The next letter was more recent. A note for Marisol, written in Teresa's last days of life. "My child, I know that one day you are going to ask about your dad. And that day, my soul will hurt, because I won't have an answer that makes you happy. Your father was not a monster. He was just a weak man. He denied you because he didn't know how to face his life. But if you ever see him, don't yell at him. Look at him. Let him know that you exist. And if he has a soul, he will tremble." Marisol put the letter aside. She didn't say anything. She walked to the window, opened it, and let the cool dawn air caress her face. She felt her chest expanding, that something inside her had been released. The next morning, Mary woke up with Marisol sitting beside her bed. "I read everything," the girl said, without mincing words. "How are you?" "Strong, sad, but strong." Mary stroked her cheek. Marisol took her hand. "And now what?" she asked. "Now you decide. If you want to talk to Dean, if you want him to call you his daughter, if you want him to be part of your life." Marisol looked at the floor, then at Mary, then out the window. "I want him to tell me the truth. Just that. I don't want explanations. I want him to look me in the eye and say yes or no. He will, and if not, then you'll know what you have to do." A few hours later, Anne found a forgotten envelope among the shelter's archive papers. It didn't have an exact date, but it did have the initials TDR. She opened it carefully. Inside was another letter, this time addressed to Robert. She read it in silence. Then, with a pale face, she went to look for Mary. "Grandma, you have to read this." Mary took it, read the letter, and her legs gave out for a second. "Robert, you asked me to leave, and I left, but I never told you everything. The girl, she wasn't only yours, she was Mary's too, because Mary raised her, without knowing it, from the very beginning, because that girl, from the womb, heard your name and hers as one. And although we were never family, in my heart, you and Mary were the only family my daughter deserved to have." Mary closed her eyes. The emotion was too much. That same afternoon, Dean appeared in front of the shelter gate. Not in a suit, not with lawyers. Alone, in simple clothes and with an envelope in his hand. Hannah let him in. Mary was waiting for him in the dining room. "Are you here to fight?" "No, I'm here to answer." He sat across from her. He took out a page written in his own handwriting. "This is not for you," he said. "It's for Marisol." "Do you want to see her?" "If she allows me." Mary nodded. She went to the courtyard, where Marisol was reading under the shade of a tree. Seeing her, the girl stood up. She didn't ask anything. She just said, "I'm ready." And as she walked toward him, Mary knew she was witnessing something that doesn't happen twice in life, the real possibility of redemption. Dean knew it too. But what neither of them imagined yet was that this conversation would be the beginning of something much deeper, a truth that would put everyone to the test, including Mary. Because at the bottom of the box there was still one last letter that no one had read. And in that letter was the greatest secret of all. Night fell over Queens, but in Anne's room the lamp was still on. Teresa's letters were on her desk, next to a notebook full of notes, dates, names, and arrows joined by red lines. Since finding the letter Mary had kept secret, Anne hadn't been able to stop thinking about a possibility that was increasingly taking shape. That Marisol was not only Dean's daughter, but that the abandonment had been intentional, premeditated, and that someone else had known it from the beginning. She knew her father had lied. She had already seen him deny paternity again and again, even in the face of evident proof. But something in Teresa's letters didn't quite fit. One in particular caused her growing unease. "Mary, if you ever find this box, if you ever read these words, don't be angry with him. He knew. He knew even before she was born. But someone made him feel that silence was better." Who was that someone? Who else had been aware of Marisol's existence before everything came to light? Anne decided to review the court documents, the lawsuit emails, the witnesses Dean had tried to present to annul the donation. One of the names caught her attention. Dr. Fred Murguia, the supposed psychiatrist who signed the report declaring Mary emotionally unstable. There was something strange about his resume, something too convenient. She went to the medical transparency portal and looked up his license number. She found it, but it was not active. It had been suspended 5 years earlier for falsifying diagnoses. "Of course," Anne murmured. "The whole thing was a setup from the start." Not only that. Among the legal file documents, she found a notarized letter dated before the hearing. It was signed by a certain J.R. Martin, a lawyer who had worked with Dean on an inheritance case years ago. The letter suggested that Dean had been warned about the existence of an unrecognized daughter. "You have been notified for the second time about the claimed paternity." Failure to respond to this request could have legal consequences should the mother decide to proceed judicially. The date of the letter was 9 years ago. Anne dropped the page onto the desk. Dad, you knew? Anger rose in her chest, but she didn't cry. She took a deep breath and dialed Carrie's number. I need you to come with me to see Grandma tomorrow. What happened now? I discovered everything, and I want her to know it, before he tries something else. The next morning, Mary was sitting in the shelter courtyard with a blanket over her legs and a cup of hot tea in her hands. She felt stronger, but not entirely recovered. Her heart beat slower, but with more truth. Anne arrived with Carrie and handed her the folder with the documents. You have to read this, Grandma. Mary looked at her, disconcerted. Is it something new? It's the confirmation that it wasn't forgetfulness. It was a decision. Dad knew about Marisol from the beginning. Teresa formally notified him, and he did everything possible to silence it, to bury it. Mary read the copies of the notarized letter, the history of the fake psychiatrist, the link with the lawyer who fabricated the diagnosis. She didn't say anything for several minutes. Then she closed the folder. Thank you for looking, and for showing me this. But it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't hurt less, but it doesn't surprise me. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to him, but not to yell at him, to close this chapter once and for all. That same day, Mary asked Hannah to call Dean. She asked him to come without companions, without excuses, without lawyers. Just him. Dean arrived late in the afternoon. He came empty-handed, his face haggard, without the arrogance that had accompanied him so many times. Mary received him in the dining room. She made him sit across from her. Anne showed me this, she said, handing him the folder. Dean skimmed it. He didn't deny anything. He just lowered his head. Why did you do it? Because I got scared. Because I didn't know how to face Teresa. Because when I knew she was pregnant, I thought it was easier to make her disappear than to own up to it. And now? Now I saw her. I heard her. And I knew she was mine. Not because of the blood, because of the way she looked at me. As if she knew everything and still wanted to give me a chance. Do you deserve it? Dean didn't answer. Mary leaned toward him. I once told you that all I needed was for you to see me as a person, not as a burden. Can you do that with Marisol? I'm going to try. Every day. Then start with this, Mary said, handing him a sheet of paper. It's an authorization for you to legally recognize her, with your last name, without pressure. Dean took it as if he were receiving a second life. Does she know? No, but she will. And as he left the shelter, with the paper in his pocket, Anne approached Mary with something else in her hand. Grandma, when we thought we had read everything, we found one last letter. From Teresa? No, this one was not in the box. It was hidden in the lining. It's not signed, but it's for you. And from what it says, Teresa didn't write it. Mary took it. She opened it with trembling hands. Mary, not everything I kept silent about was out of cowardice. Some things I kept to protect you. If you ever read this, maybe you've already forgiven me. But if not, at least you'll know that you weren't the only one who lived with a secret. There is something else. Something I didn't tell you. And it will change everything you think you know. Mary froze. Because that handwriting, that way of writing, was not Teresa's. It was Robert's, her husband. And what came next promised to rewrite absolutely everything. The afternoon fell over the shelter like a soft, warm, golden veil. In the courtyard, the children played with laughter. unaware that, inside the main room, a truth was about to change the course of the entire Gonzalez family. Mary sat in her rocking chair with the envelope in her hands. The unsigned letter, found by Anne in the false bottom of Teresa's box, had left her motionless. But she knew. She didn't need a signature to recognize Robert's handwriting. It was his straight, meticulous hand, slightly tilted to the left. He had never been a man of many words, but when he wrote, he did so as if each letter contained the weight of what he was keeping silent. Mary slowly opened the paper. Mary, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you. And if you got this far, it's because you found everything I hid. There is something I could never tell you. Not out of fear, but out of shame. Years ago, when we still lived in the Astoria house, it wasn't just Teresa who crossed my path. There was another woman, very different from her, darker, more dangerous. Her name was Elvira. Mary frowned. That name shook her. Elvira, a seamstress with a harsh voice who worked for them for just a few months. She always seemed strange to her, too curious, too present in everything. Elvira wasn't looking for affection. She was looking for something more. I don't know if it was blackmail, manipulation, or simple fate. The truth is that one night, after an argument with you, I drank too much and let her into my life and our bed. The paper trembled in Mary's hands. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and continued reading. Weeks later, she looked for me. She told me she was pregnant. I didn't want to believe her. I walked away. I asked her not to come back, but she didn't disappear. Years later, when you were caring for a girl who claimed to be a distant niece of a neighbor, I knew. That girl. She was mine. I never dared to say it. That girl was placed in the custody of the Department of Child Services, and you received her without knowing anything. You raised her for a few months. Then she was sent to another foster home. We never saw her again. Her name was Teresa. Mary let the letter fall onto her lap. All the air in the room seemed to disappear. Teresa. Was Teresa Roberts' daughter? The same Teresa who years later would return as an employee in her house? The same one who would later become her husband's lover? The same one who gave her a granddaughter she had raised without knowing it? Teresa had been her stepdaughter. And Marisol, then, was not only her granddaughter by Dean, but also by Robert. Her blood, on both sides. A truth as twisted as it was brutal. Anne walked in at that very moment, unaware of what she was about to witness. "Grandma, Hannah is here." She stopped when she saw Mary's face. Pale, shattered. What happened? Mary handed her the letter. Anne read it slowly. Her face changed, from surprise to horror, from horror to a deep sadness. "Does this mean—" "Yes," Mary interrupted, her voice raspy. "Teresa was Robert's daughter, born before he knew what it meant to be a man, born in the shadows, raised in institutions, without love, and then, without knowing it, she brought Marisol into the world, who is the daughter of her half-brother." Anne covered her mouth. She couldn't speak. "And what are we going to do?" she finally asked. Mary stood up slowly. She put the letter in her notebook. "We are going to take care of Marisol, as always, with even more reason now, but without telling her yet, not until she's ready. And Dean? He doesn't know either, nor will he, until she knows first." Anne approached her, hugged her. Mary was trembling, not from fear, but from the certainty that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. "All this," Mary murmured, "all this happened under my roof, and I didn't see anything, Or maybe I didn't want to see. Night fell over the shelter. Marisol slept peacefully, unaware of the tangled mess surrounding her. Dean, in his apartment, clumsily wrote the letter he wanted to give his daughter. Anne, in her room, reviewed every line of Robert's letter, as if trying to find some sign of hope. But Mary sat at the table and wrote in her notebook with a steady hand. A truth revealed at the wrong time can save or destroy. Sometimes the hardest thing is not hiding the secret. It is deciding when to tell it, and to whom. The next day, Mary asked to speak with Marisol alone, and in the tone of her voice there was no longer any doubt, only preparation. Because what she was about to reveal would not only change Marisol's history, it could change her identity. The shelter dining room was empty, illuminated only by the faint light coming in from the courtyard. Mary sat at the head of the table with Robert's letter in her hand. She had read it so many times in silence that she already knew it by heart, but she still couldn't fully assimilate what it meant. She had spent her entire life trying to sustain a family, and now, suddenly, the truth showed her that there had always been another one beneath hers. An older one, messier, more painful. She asked for Dean to be called. Hannah was the one who communicated it to him, with a firm, unadorned voice. Mary wants to talk to you. Today. Alone. Dean arrived promptly. He walked into the shelter with a less confident step than usual. He no longer carried arrogance on his shoulders. He had been losing it little by little since he looked at Marisol for the first time without a shield. He entered the dining room, saw her sitting there, and lowered his gaze like a child fearing his mother's scolding. "Sit down," Mary said, without raising her voice. Dean obeyed. "What's going on?" Mary slowly slid the letter across the table until it was in front of him. "I want you to read it. All of it. Out loud." He picked up the page, and upon seeing the handwriting, he immediately recognized it as his father's. Robert wrote this? Yes, and he kept it hidden for decades, until he finally hid it in Teresa's box. Dean swallowed. He began to read. His voice, firm at first, broke with every line. Years ago, there was another woman. Her name was Elvira. She told me she was pregnant. I didn't believe her. But when that girl appeared years later at the Department of Child Services, and you, Mary, took her in for a few months, I knew the truth. That girl, she was Teresa. Yes, Teresa, the one who later worked with you. Teresa, our daughter. Dean stopped reading. "What is this?" he murmured, stunned. "Keep reading," Mary ordered. "Don't stop now." Dean continued. "I never told you because I didn't know how, because I felt dirty, because if you knew you had mistakenly raised my illegitimate daughter, you would have left me, or you would have forgiven me, and that would have been worse. But life is that cruel, because years later, our daughter, Teresa, crossed paths with our son, and from that union a child was born. Marisol." The letter fell from Dean's hands. No, it can't be." "Yes, it can," Mary said, her eyes firm, crystalline. "Marisol is Teresa's daughter, and yours. Teresa unknowingly fell in love with her half-brother, and you never dared to tell me that that woman had told you she was expecting your child." "I didn't know who she was. I didn't know what—" Dean stammered. "I was young, Mum. I was confused. It was a mistake. A single mistake." "No, Dean. It wasn't a mistake. It was a chain. A story full of silences, of cowardice, of omissions. And you were part of every link." Dean stood up from the chair and began pacing in circles. His hands were on his head, his eyes wide. "And now what?" What do you want me to do with this truth? Tell Marisol. Hi, I'm your dad, and I'm also your mum's brother. Is that what you want? I want you not to run away, Mary replied firmly, because that's what you've done all your life. Run away, keep silent, manipulate. Dean stopped. He looked at her as if it were the first time he truly saw his mother. And you? Why didn't you tell me when you adopted Teresa? Because I didn't know. Because I thought she was just another child, like so many others. I never imagined that the woman you abandoned was also my husband's daughter. And now I know, and I can't keep it silent anymore. There was a long silence. And Marisol? Marisol doesn't know. Not yet. But we are not going to bury her in more lies. She will know when she's ready. And you are going to be there too, not as her hero, as her truth. Dean approached, sat down again. He rested his forehead on the table and broke down. Mary watched him without moving. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a deep weariness mixed with intact dignity. If you really want to start over, start by accepting who you are, not just the son who failed me, not just the father who wasn't there, also the man who can change the course if he dares. Dean raised his head. For the first time in a long time, he nodded. I'll do it. But just when Mary thought that moment of redemption could close the darkest chapter of their lives, Hannah walked into the dining room with a distraught face. Mary, you have to come. It's urgent. What happened? It's Marisol. She's gone. She disappeared from the shelter this afternoon. And she left a note. Mary stood up abruptly. She took the page Hannah handed her. She read it in a low voice. I need to think. Don't look for me. I just want to know if what I am was a punishment or an accident. Mary felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. Marisol was out there, alone, and with her heart about to break over a truth she still didn't know completely, but one that was already chasing her. The note Marisol had left was still on the shelter dining room table, crumpled by Mary's trembling hands. Night had fallen hours ago, but no one had slept. Hannah organized search parties. Anne checked terminals, parks, nearby alleys, while Carrie asked merchants and neighbours in the area. Dean didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to the door, lost in thought, as if the whole world had been reduced to the echo of a single sentence written in a child's handwriting. I just want to know if what I am was a punishment or an accident. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Mary approached him. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with determination. If you don't do something now, you will lose her forever. Dean looked at her, broken. I don't know where to start. Start by stopping looking for her with fear and start looking for her with love. He didn't need anything more. Dean left alone. He walked whole blocks with no precise direction. He remembered the places he used to go when he was young to clear his head. He remembered that, sometimes, when he wanted to escape from everything, he would sit in front of the town square gazebo, in silence, as if the world could spin without him. And there, on that rusty bench in front of the gazebo, he saw her. Marisol, her feet dangling, hugging her backpack. Her gaze was fixed on an undefined point, and her face was tearless, but with a sadness so great that it made him stop a few feet away, unsure how to approach. She saw him, but didn't move. If you came to say it was all a mistake, she said, without turning her face, you don't need to sit down. Dean swallowed. I didn't come for that. He sat beside her, not too close, just enough so the distance wouldn't hurt. I came to listen to you. Marisol pressed her lips together. What if I tell you I don't want to talk? Then I'll stay here, silent. but with you. Minutes passed in silence, only the wind and the distant sound of a taxi passing on the empty street. You knew who my mum was, she said suddenly, and yet you never asked about me. I know. Why? Because I was afraid. Because it was easier to look the other way. Because I'm a coward, Marisol. She looked at him for the first time, not with hatred, with something worse, disappointment. And now what do you want? For me to forgive you? For me to call you Dad? Dean looked her straight in the eyes. I want you to allow me to show you that I am no longer the man I was. I don't expect you to call me Dad. But if you ever want to, I'll be ready. And what if I never want to? Then I'll keep being around, not to force you, to take care of you from wherever you let me. Marisol lowered her head. She stayed like that for a long time. Then, without looking at him, she said, What did my mum do when she was scared? She sang. An old song, Dean replied softly. The Ship of Oblivion. Marisol smiled for the first time in days, barely a slight curve of the lips. Then sing it. Here? Here. And Dean, his voice broken but honest, began to hum the first lines. Wait a little longer, just a little more. Marisol closed her eyes. The wind blew harder, but they didn't move. When the song ended, she picked up her backpack, stood up, and said, I'm tired. Let's go home. Dean walked beside her without saying a word. Halfway there, he stopped. Can I hold your hand? Marisol hesitated. Then she extended hers without looking at him. He took it like someone holding a valuable piece of crystal, carefully, with fear, but with hope. Arriving at the shelter, Mary was waiting for them at the entrance. She didn't say anything. She just opened her arms. Marisol ran toward her and buried herself in her chest. Dean stood a few feet away, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. Hannah handed him a sheet of paper. What is this? He asked. It's Marisol's new school registration. It has your last name, as you requested. Dean read it with blurred eyes. Marisol del Rio Gonzalez. Does she know? She asked for it. She said it wasn't to honor you, it was to close a cycle. Dean nodded. It was fair, more than he deserved. That night they all slept, calmly, in peace. But at dawn, Mary woke up with a strange pressure in her chest. It wasn't pain, it was intuition. Something else was coming. And it was something that neither she, nor Dean, nor Marisol were prepared to face, because it didn't come from the past. It came from the present, and it had a first and last name, and a truth that had not yet been spoken. The morning sun entered timidly through the shelter windows, as if it knew the day carried a special weight. Mary was sitting on the stone bench in the central courtyard, watching Marisol from afar. The girl, who days earlier seemed like a storm about to burst, now moved with an unsettling calm, picking up dry leaves from the garden, one by one, as if each contained something of her own history. Dean arrived early. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Marisol saw him as soon as he crossed the gate, but she didn't move. Nor did she reject him. He approached with his hands in his pockets, his eyes downcast. Mary stood up without saying a word and went inside the building. That conversation had to be just between the two of them. I didn't come to ask for anything, Dean said, his voice deep, containing his emotions. Not forgiveness, not space, not a title. Marisol looked at him. Her gaze was clear, but firm. Then why did you come? To stay close, if you let me. to take care of you from wherever you say, to never disappear again." She watched him for a long time. Then she sat on the bench. He understood the gesture and sat down beside her, leaving a space between them. Not as father and daughter, as two strangers recognizing each other for the first time. "My mum," Marisol began, without looking at him, "taught me to forgive. Not because people deserve it, but because you deserve not to carry the anger anymore. Your mum was brave. She was," she said. "And you were not." Dean swallowed. "No. Why now?" "Because you exist. Because I'm no longer afraid to face who I am. Because if I don't know you, if I don't stay with you, I'll know I let go of the only opportunity that was really worth it." Marisol took a deep breath. "Can you sing?" "What?" she repeated. "Can you? A little?" "Why?" "Because when Mum was scared, she sang to me. And when I was scared, I sang alone." Dean lowered his gaze. Then he hummed, with a broken voice, the same song he had sung to her in the town square. "Wait a little longer, just a little more." Marisol closed her eyes. She didn't say anything. She stayed still. And when the song ended, she murmured, "I'm scared, but I'm not alone anymore." Dean looked at her. A tear rolled down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't dare. "Can I be with you, even in silence?" "Yes," she said. "But you have to learn not to break down when I don't talk to you. Because it will happen. I'll accept it. And you have to understand that my love will come slowly, like yours. I will wait." She extended her hand, not for him to take it, for him to follow her. She stood up, walked toward the shelter's vegetable garden, and he followed behind, like a child starting over. Mary watched them from a window. She smiled. Finally, something was being rebuilt, not like before, in a different, more honest way. Hours later, during lunch, Hannah entered with a yellow envelope in her hand. Mary said in a serious tone, "This arrived. It comes from a notary's office in Pennsylvania. It's addressed to you, but with an anonymous sender." Mary took it carefully. She opened it in front of everyone. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a notification of an unclaimed inheritance, a will dated more than 30 years ago, in Robert Anthony Gonzalez's name. In the margin, a handwritten note. "This belongs to your granddaughter, but it's not Marisol. There's another one." The world stopped for a second. "Another one?" Mary whispered. Anne read the page attentively. "It says there is a deposit in the name of a minor born in Pennsylvania in 1993, that the mother passed away and the legal guardian was never located." Mary closed her eyes. "Elvira," she murmured. "He told me about an Elvira." Dean approached. "Do you think he had another daughter?" "I don't think it," Mary said. "I know it." And if that were the case, then Marisol was not the only missing piece. There was another life out there, another name, another truth, and time was running out to find her. The midday sun brought a soft light over the shelter, the kind of light that doesn't burn, but illuminates with nostalgia. Hannah had given the news early. Mary had decided to organize a special lunch. It was not a party or a celebration. It was something more intimate, more symbolic. Mary wanted, for the first time in years, to sit everyone at the same table, without judgment, without complaints, just presence. The dining room tables were joined to form a single long line. Anne and Carrie helped set the tablecloths. Marisol carefully folded napkins, and Dean, without anyone asking him, offered to prepare the fruit drinks. His gesture was simple, but in Mary's eyes, it was a clear sign. He was trying. Mary appeared later, dressed in her favorite white linen blouse and the blue scarf her mother had knitted for her. She walked slowly but confidently. She stopped in front of the table and looked at everyone. Her granddaughters, Marisol, Dean, Hannah, and the children who lived there, who would also be part of the meal, because Mary no longer differentiated family by blood, but by actions. "Before we eat," she said in a serene voice, "I want to thank you for being here. What we are today, we are with all our wounds, and yet we choose to continue. That, in itself, is a lot." There was no applause, only a warm silence, deep, human. During the meal, conversations were timid at first, but little by little, the children's laughter filled the space, and something in the atmosphere loosened up. Mary talked to Carrie about her studies. Anne helped serve the little ones. Dean sat across from Marisol, and although they didn't say much, they shared the bread. And that, for both of them, was an act of reconciliation. At one point, Mary took out a small wooden box and placed it in the middle of the table. Everyone looked at her. She opened it carefully and took out what was inside. The photos she had kept throughout her life. Robert, with Dean as a child. Teresa as a teenager, holding Marisol in her arms. Young Mary, knitting under the shade of a tree. She passed them around one by one. "It's not about erasing the past," she said. "It's about understanding it, looking at it without fear. All of this is who we are. The mistakes, the silences, the truths, also the attempts to repair." Dean held the photo of Teresa for a few seconds longer than the others. He looked at it with a mixture of guilt and tenderness. Then he passed it to Marisol. She held it with both hands. Her eyes lingered on her mother's face. She didn't say anything. She just put it in her backpack, as if she finally knew where she belonged. When everyone finished eating, Mary stood up one last time. "I don't know how much time I have left," she said. "But I do know that if today were my last day, I would leave in peace, because we are finally together, not perfect, but together." Dean stood up. He went to his mother. He hugged her. And for the first time since Marisol called him Dad, the girl also stood up and approached. "Can I say something?" she asked, her voice timid. "Of course, my dear," Mary said. "I don't know how families work, but I know how it feels to be accompanied. And this," she looked at everyone, "feels like home." The dining room filled with contained emotion. No one cried out loud. No one needed to. Because in that instant, everyone who was there understood that second chances don't come wrapped in promises, but in small acts like this. Sharing a table, looking forward, accepting that what is broken can also be held together. When the meal ended and the dishes were washed, Mary retired to her room. She was exhausted, but happy. As she lay down on her bed, she noticed an envelope under the pillow. It wasn't hers. It wasn't there by chance. She picked it up carefully. It had no sender. It just said, "For you, who carried so much without knowing it." Mary opened it. Inside, a single handwritten page. "You weren't the only mother. You weren't the only one deceived. And there's still something left to say. I'm alive, and I want to see you." Mary felt a chill. Who was it? Who was writing to her now? The only thing clear was that, although she thought she had reached the end of her revelations, there was still one more story, awaiting its moment. And that moment had arrived. The morning of the tribute dawned bright. as if the sky itself had decided to dress up for a celebration. The children of the shelter ran back and forth, hanging paper garlands, painted by themselves. In one corner of the courtyard, Hannah checked the final details with a notebook in her hand. Anne and Carrie arranged the plastic chairs, while Marisol hung a large poster made with red cardboard and golden letters. Thank you, Mary, for the heart you shared. Dean arrived early, alone, with a small box in his hands. He was wearing a white shirt he had never worn, and in his eyes was a mixture of emotion and nervousness that he couldn't hide. Mary had not yet left her room. No one had seen her since dawn, but everyone knew she would come down, because that day was not only to thank her, it was also to close a chapter. At 11 o'clock, Hannah picked up the makeshift microphone and asked for silence. Today we are not here to celebrate a benefactor or a donor, not even a grandmother. We are here to celebrate a woman who transformed everything she touched from silence, without asking for anything in return. The applause was spontaneous, long, heartfelt. Mary then appeared on the threshold of the door, leaning on Marisol's arm. She was dressed in light blue, with a white scarf around her neck. She walked slowly but confidently, with her head held high and a serenity that was moving. Everyone stood up. When she sat down in front of the group, Hannah handed her a paper rose. Your name is like a flower, but you blossomed when others were wilting. Thank you for that. One by one, the children of the shelter began reading small notes. Thanks, memories, simple but powerful phrases. Thank you for patiently teaching me to read. Thank you for helping me sleep without fear. Thank you for calling me your child even when no one else did. Mary listened in silence, with a gentle smile on her lips. At one point, her eyes met Dean's. He approached. Everyone fell silent. There are things I can't give back, he said, his voice choked. But I can appreciate what you did for me, even when I didn't deserve it. And I can acknowledge what you did for my daughter, when I didn't know how to do it. Mary looked at him deeply. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. Dean then took a small carved wooden figure from the box, a woman with braided hair, with a child asleep in her arms. I carved it myself. I wanted to give you something that wasn't bought, something that spoke of you. Marisol was the next to approach. She walked to the front, with no paper in her hands, no rehearsal. Grandma, she said, her voice firm. You were my refuge when I didn't know I needed one. You gave me your name without me asking, your time, your love. You taught me that not everything that comes from a wound ends in pain, and that forgiveness, sometimes, is the bravest thing you can offer. The applause this time was longer. Some children cried without knowing why. Hannah discreetly wiped away her tears. Mary stood up with Dean's help. She took the microphone. I never wanted tributes, or flowers, or words. I only wanted not to leave empty-handed. And today I understand that I am not leaving with full hands. I am leaving with a complete soul. She turned to look at Marisol, her granddaughters, Hannah, every child she had cared for with her own hands. Then she looked toward the back of the courtyard, where a man was observing from afar, standing next to the gate. Mary narrowed her eyes. Who is that? She asked in a low voice. Hannah looked in the same direction. I don't know. No one has seen him before. Mary remained still. Something about that face seemed vaguely familiar. The man made no move to enter. He just nodded his head, like someone confirming something important, and walked away. Mary felt a pang in her chest, not of pain, of intuition. When the ceremony ended and everyone began to tidy up, Mary returned to her room. On her bed, There was an envelope, with no name. She opened it. I didn't come to interrupt. I just came to confirm that you are well. What comes next will not be easy, because not everyone knows that a story can have another ending, and I still need to tell you mine. Mary squeezed the note in her hand, because what was approaching was more than a revelation. It was the last truth, and it didn't come from the past. It came from the present, from someone alive, from someone who still had something to claim. Mary read the note over and over again. Every word echoed like bells inside her chest, not from fear, but from the kind of truth one feels before confirming it. The handwriting was elegant, firm, undeniably written by someone educated, someone who knew exactly what they wanted to say. I'm alive, and I want to see you. She put the envelope in her notebook, closed her bedroom door, and went down to the courtyard. The shelter was quiet after the tribute. The children were sleeping. Hannah was organizing books in the library. Dean, Marisol, and Anne chatted in the kitchen, laughing softly. It was the first time in years that the place smelled like a home, not a refuge. But Mary knew that a chapter still needed to be closed. And she couldn't do it without confronting that person who claimed to be alive. Elvira. The name resurfaced with force, like an echo that refused to disappear. Robert had only mentioned her once, and Mary, in her innocence or out of a need for peace, had chosen to forget her. That night, she didn't sleep. The next morning, she took a taxi to Pennsylvania. The address was on the back of the envelope. It was a modest neighborhood, with houses lined up like old soldiers. In front of house number 14, a woman waited, sitting in a rocking chair. She was elderly, with white hair, but with a straight back and a face untouched by the years. When Mary got out of the car, there were no words of welcome, only a prolonged, almost silent look. Elvira? Mary asked. Yes. Then you already know who I am. I always knew. They entered in silence. The house smelled of old coffee and damp wood. In the center of the living room, on a small table, there was a framed photograph. A girl with dark, intense eyes, similar to Marisol's. But it wasn't Marisol. Who is she? My daughter. Her name is Inez, and she is also Robert Anthony Gonzalez's daughter. Mary closed her eyes for an instant. Why didn't you tell me before? Because he asked me to. He gave me money to disappear. I accepted because I was afraid. I was 20 years old. I was alone. And afterwards, when I found out about you, I respected you, because I knew you had also been deceived. Where is she now? Ines lives in Philadelphia. She's a doctor. She never wanted to know about her father, but she asked me many times if she had siblings. I told her no, until I found out about you and Marisol. Then I knew I couldn't keep silent anymore. Mary looked at the photo. Ines was an adult woman, strong, with the gaze of someone self-made. Does she want to meet me? I don't know, but she wants to know her history. They spent hours talking. Elvira did not ask for forgiveness, nor did she offer it. She was a woman who no longer carried guilt, only the desire to put the pieces in place before she died. Before saying goodbye, she handed her a letter from Inez to Mary. Thank you for not hating me without knowing me. I don't want anything. No money. Just to know if there is truly something in me that is not just shadow. Just one word from you is enough. Not an explanation. A word. Am I a part? Or am I just another wound? Mary cried for the first time in days. Not from pain. From compassion. From recognition. She returned to the shelter at dusk. Marisol ran to hug her. Dean received her with worried eyes. "Are you okay?" "I am complete," Mary replied. That night, she sat at the dining room table with a blank page. Everyone was present, even the older children: Hannah, Dean, Anne, Carrie, Marisol. Mary took a breath. "I have written many letters in my life. Some were never read. Others arrived late. This will be the last one." And she began to read. "Dear family, maybe I am not old enough to enjoy, but I still have a heart to share. And that is why I leave you what I have. My story, my mistakes, my loves, and the right to start over with what has been learned. To my granddaughters, I leave the voice. To Marisol, the fire. To Dean, the time we didn't know how to give each other. And to those who knew me without knowing my story, thank you for listening." When she finished, the silence was as deep as it was beautiful. Marisol approached. She took her hand. "And to Inez?" "To Inez, I leave the certainty that she was never a wound. She was a part of it from the first heartbeat. It's just that no one knew how to name it in time." Everyone applauded in silence, and so, as a candle slowly goes out, Mary leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and smiled. Because you don't need to die to leave in peace. You only need to be heard, understood, and loved.